Chapter 325. The sunset glow was as red as the burning clouds. A cool breeze blew gently, making people feel relaxed and happy. Brettel City had been repaired during this period of time. All the holes and scars had been repaired. The two tall magic crystal cannons at the city gates flickered with a faint red light under the sunset glow, as if they could spit out huge tongues of flame at any time. Helentina, who'd been forced by Han Shuo to sign a contract, looked at the two magic crystal cannons that should have belonged to her at the city gates. She felt very upset. Han Shuo was all smiles as he stood on the city walls. Holding the contract, he waved goodbye and said, "Honorable Duke Helen, we won't be escorting you." Helentina cursed all 18 generations of Han Shuo's ancestors in her heart. She was worried that Helen Duchy might rebel at any time. Her mental strength recovered, and she slowly used a levitation spell to fly into the sky. Her bright eyes glared fiercely at Han Shuo for a while. Then she gritted her teeth and said in a low voice, "Greedy demon, I will definitely come back for revenge. Have a safe trip. Remember to pay me back the gold coins you owe me within 3 months." Han Shuo smiled wholeheartedly as he shook the contract in his hand, as if reminding Helentina not to renege on her debt. Humph! Helentina angrily turned her head and slowly flew in the direction of Helen Duchy like a fiery shadow. Under the illumination of the sunset glow, this fiery shadow was like a rainbow cutting through the sky. My lord is really too evil. Not only did he take possession of this poisonous beauty, he even extorted a large amount of gold coins. He really eats people up without spitting out the bones. Chester shook his head and sighed. His gaze towards Han Shuo was full of worship. I didn't think that this Helentina would be so beautiful. No wonder Benedict of Narsen Duchy is so infatuated with her. What a pity, what a pity. He definitely didn't think that my lord would be one step ahead of him and pluck this flower. Dick laughed mischievously, taking pleasure in other people's misfortune. He maliciously speculated about Benedict's ugly expression when he found out about this. Lord Castellan, I believe that with Helentina's viciousness, she won't be satisfied after she leaves. As long as she releases the news that our Brettel City has 400,000 gold coins, I think the 7 Grand Duchies will definitely have greedy hearts. Falk, who was leaning against Han Shuo, said worriedly to Han Shuo after Helentina left. Han Shuo frowned and pondered for a while as he looked at the rosy sky. He then looked at the blurry shadows of the mountains surrounding Brettel City. He said to Dick in the distance, "Dick, send some people to the surrounding mountains and invite the mountain chiefs to Brettel City. Tell them that I'm treating them to a meal." My lord, the previous city lords of Brettel City were all mediocre and incompetent people, never able to help them resist the bandits. Therefore, they have never had a good impression of Brettel City's city lords. Naturally, there's no reverence for them. I can pass the news to them, but I'm afraid that they'll look down on us and refuse to attend the banquet. Dick had an awkward expression on his face, hesitating for a moment before explaining to Han Shuo. That was then and this is now. Fulkin of Mount Tali will definitely come. If he passes the news to the others before coming, I believe that the chiefs of the other mountains who know of our strength will also be willing to come down. The past is the past, the present is the present. All of Brettel City is my territory, and they are all my subjects. If these people really don't know what's good for them, I'll let them know how to respect a city lord. Han Shuo said unhurriedly to Dick. Dick nodded and replied, "All right, I'll definitely inform them." Dick was also a mountain person. He'd been in contact with the mountain people in the surrounding mountains before Han Shuo had come to Brettel City. He'd secretly maintained a good relationship with them. Dick originally didn't hold any hope for Han Shuo, but now that he'd witnessed Han Shuo's strength and methods, he understood that if his unruly compatriots provoked Han Shuo, they wouldn't be able to bear the consequences. Therefore, as soon as Han Shuo's words fell, Dick made up his mind to persuade his unruly compatriots to come. He didn't want them to die under Han Shuo's undead army. After Dick left, Han Shuo said to Falk, "Use the gold coins in our hands and do everything in our power to arm the entire Brettel City. I've already commissioned some trading companies to transport war chariots, catapults, kerosene, goblin missiles, and other firepower equipment. All you need to do is have the masons tamp down any weak spots on the city walls and increase the height of the city walls that aren't high enough. City Lord, the craftsmen are already working overtime to complete these tasks. What we currently lack the most are manpower and soldiers with combat strength. Bretel City has experienced the poison of war, and the total number of citizens in the city is only about 50,000. Compared to some large cities with millions of citizens, the population is pitifully small. We've been recruiting soldiers recently, but we've only recruited 200 or so soldiers despite such a great temptation. The number of people is far from enough. With such a large Bretel City, it's basically impossible to rely on the 3,000 soldiers in the city to defend the 4 city gates. Even if we have powerful firepower, we still need people to operate it. If we can't solve the population problem, I think Bretel City will always be this lifeless. Falk was indeed worthy of being a knight who had experienced the fires of war. He could see what Bretel City lacked the most with a single glance. This was also the biggest weakness of Bretel City. This was indeed a difficult problem. Han Shua also understood that what Bretel City lacked the most right now was manpower. However, he didn't have a good way to solve this problem. Bretel City had always been in the flames of war. After so many years, some of the residents who had come out of Bretel City had already compared it to hell on earth. Not only the original residents, but also the civilians from other cities who knew of Bretel City would probably not be willing to move to Bretel City. What Han Shua could do now was to first ensure the safety of Bretel City and then start from all aspects. Through good policies, safety conditions, and benefits that would be beneficial to their development, he would slowly attract residents from other cities to settle in Bretel City. However, this wasn't a process that could be accomplished overnight. It would indeed require a period of transition. At the very least, he had to eliminate the threat of the 7 Grand Duchies. Only then would he slowly let bystanders understand that Bretel City was indeed safe. Only then would he be able to dispel the panic of the fearful. Yes, I know this is indeed our biggest problem. We indeed have no way to attract residents to move in for the time being. However, as long as we can stop the 7 Grand Duchies from raiding and spread the news that Bretel City is safe, some of the homesick residents will be willing to come back. Starting from all aspects, I believe that Bretel City will become prosperous sooner or later. Currently, we lack some manpower and soldiers. We can start from the mountain people in the surrounding mountains. This is also the reason why I had them come to Bretel City. I heard from Dick that there are 30 to 40,000 mountain people in the surrounding mountains. Among them, there are actually about 10,000 who have the ability to fight. If we can grasp and make use of this force, in addition to our excellent equipment and 6 magic crystal cannons, we will have a higher chance of success in resisting the invasion of the 7 Grand Duchies. Han Shua had long since considered this problem and patiently explained to Falk the purpose of summoning the mountain people. Since my lordship has already considered everything thoroughly, then I won't say anything more. In addition, young Master Lawrence will soon send over a few people who are experts in managing the city's finances. Bretel City's military and political affairs should also be on the right track. Falk said respectfully. Nodding, Han Shua said faintly, "Yes, I'll leave these matters to you for the time being." Currently, Bretel City had 100 businesses waiting to flourish and was extremely lacking in all kinds of talents. The military and political talents that Lawrence had arranged could indeed play an important role. However, these people were all arranged by Lawrence. Once the military and political talents took control of important positions in Bretel City in the early stages, it would be difficult to remove them in the future. If this situation was allowed to continue and Han Shua kept using Lawrence's people to manage the military and political affairs, this kind of unwitting infiltration could slowly turn Bretel City into Lawrence's. Han Shua was now much more mature than before and understood this drawback. It was a pity that he didn't have any of his own people that he could use. It was hard to guess whether Lawrence was doing this out of good intentions or harboring ulterior motives. Now was the time when he was most lacking in talents, so he could only leave things as they were. However, Han Shua had already started to consider the future and was truly considering using some of his own trusted aides. Whether it was training or digging, this wasn't a simple matter. With this thought in mind, Han Shua gradually walked back to his room. After staying in the city lord's mansion for 2 days, Han Shuo supervised the progress of some of the city's defensive facilities during the day and diligently practiced his magical arts and magic at night. However, the further one progressed in magical arts, the more difficult it became. Just relying on this kind of boring daily practice wouldn't make much progress. On the other hand, Han Shuo, who had the mental strength of a grand magus, could make rapid progress in magic. Therefore, Han Shuo currently put more of his energy into the study of necromancy magic. Using the secret room in the city lord's mansion, Han Shuo could easily teleport to the Cemetery of Death. The Cemetery of Death was the most suitable place for necromancers to practice cultivation. Not only did it have a dense aura of death, but it also had a complete set of magical tools and laboratories. Every night, Han Shuo would stay in the Cemetery of Death alone and capture some living magical beasts to practice the Soul Tremor magic spell. Now that Han Shuo's magical arts had reached the separate magic realm, his soul had transformed into an even more mysterious consciousness. The consciousness had some very wondrous uses. Based on his research on the soul and his memories of magical arts, Han Shuo gradually felt that the understanding of the soul in necromancy magic and the changes in the consciousness had some similarities. Especially at this realm, the consciousness that could sense the presence of all living beings in the surroundings, create illusions on people's souls, and plant magical marks on people's souls seemed to have some wondrous similarities with the mental strength that could communicate with the magical elements that were everywhere in this world. On a sudden whim, Han Shuo even considered whether magical arts and magic could be fused together, complementing each other's advantages and disadvantages. However, for the current Han Shuo, it was still very difficult to implement this wondrous idea. This was because Han Shuo had yet to reach true proficiency in any field. Wanting to thoroughly master the two would be a long and arduous process of exploration. It looked like he wouldn't be able to implement it in a short period of time. Soul Tremor was a magic that used mental strength to attack the opponent's soul. Han Shuo had used living magical beasts to experiment for 2 days. Adding on to his understanding of mental attacks, he had gradually grasped some of the essentials of the magic. On the 3rd day, Han Shuo walked out of the Cemetery of Death. The warm sunlight shone on his body, giving Han Shuo a sense of contentment and comfort. As Han Shuo was inspecting the progress of Brettel City, Dick appeared out of nowhere and respectfully walked to Han Shuo's side, saying, "My lord, I have already sent out your invitation as per your instructions. The 5 mountain chiefs in the surrounding mountains have all agreed to attend the banquet in Brettel City in 7 days." Smiling slightly, Han Shuo looked deeply at Dick and said meaningfully, "Dick, you are also a mountain person. I know that you will definitely not be disappointed if I leave this matter to you. Of course, with your methods, I'm afraid that even the mountain chiefs who dare not come will be met with misfortune. I don't want to become the mountain people's sinner." Dick thought inwardly, but his expression was respectful as he said with a smile, "My lord's annihilation of the Red-Beard bandits has given the mountain people confidence. I think that they will definitely be filled with hope when they attend the banquet this time. Perhaps they are a bit more afraid, haha." Han Shuo chuckled as he looked at Dick. How could he not know what the mountain people were thinking? Dick had said everything, so they naturally knew what to do. "Indeed, a bit, heh?" Dick replied with a dry laugh. Looking into Han Shuo's eyes, Dick felt as if Han Shuo knew everything he was thinking. He couldn't help but feel a bit apprehensive. Chapter 326. The continuous sound of horse hooves rapidly approached from afar. Han Shuo had been inspecting the progress of the construction on the city walls when he saw Falk, the leader of the knights, rush over anxiously. Falk quickly dismounted and jogged to the wall in front of Han Shuo. He raised his head to look at Han Shuo, panting heavily. "City Lord, the caravan transporting chariots and other equipment from Seamis City has been robbed by several groups of bandits. The bandits have said that they will only release the people and the chariots and other equipment if they pay 50,000 gold coins." The bandits roaming the way from Seamis City to Brettel City weren't large in scale. When Han Shuo had ordered these equipment from the merchant guilds through Phoebe, not only had he warned them to be careful of the bandits along the way, but he'd also had Falk send people to pick them up in advance. According to Han Shuo's judgment, Those small groups of bandits shouldn't have the guts to make a move. Now that he'd heard Fox news, he asked with a gloomy face, "You're saying that several groups of bandits joined forces to make a move?" Fox's expression was a bit awkward as he nodded. "That's right. One group of bandits definitely wouldn't dare to make a move, but this time, 5 groups of bandits joined forces. The guards of the caravan simply couldn't hold them off. City Lord, those damned bandits are courting death. I'll immediately lead the knights in the city to eradicate all of them." "Wait," Han Shua shouted, stopping Fox's impulsive actions. He thought for a moment before asking, "How many people know that we've purchased those chariots and equipment?" "The soldiers who picked us up on the way this time know." "What about it, my lord?" Fox was puzzled. He didn't understand why Han Shua would suddenly mention this matter. Snorting coldly, Han Shua said, "How could those bandits so coincidentally know that the caravan would arrive on that day? How could they suddenly join forces and extort gold coins from us after robbing the caravan? Don't you think this is a bit interesting?" Fox was shocked when he heard these words. He shouted, "My lord, are you saying that there might be a spy among our people?" "Not perhaps, there definitely is." Han Shua suddenly shouted, "I won't pursue your dereliction of duty for now. I'll give you half a day to find that spy and execute him. In addition, during the next recruitment, don't carelessly recruit people just because you're short on manpower. Kick out anyone with a dirty background." "Yes," Fox loudly replied and leapt onto his horse. He rode his horse and galloped away with a cold expression. He was the one in charge of this matter. Now that such a big mistake had occurred, he couldn't escape responsibility no matter what. When Lawrence had sent him to Brettel City, he'd explained to him that Han Shua would be in charge of his life and death from now on. Having witnessed Han Shua's tyrannical strength, Fox understood that Han Shua wasn't a soft-hearted person. He cursed the traitor in his heart as he racked his brains for a way to quickly drag him out. An hour later, on the spacious marble plaza in front of the city lord's mansion, a total of 300 knights were lined up neatly under Fox's orders. All of them were tall and sturdy, clad in shining armor. Not to mention Fox's dereliction of duty this time, the military bearing and aura of these knights had been tempered through his training. They indeed had the demeanor of a grand knight regiment. This proved that Fox was indeed an outstanding knight officer. Han Shua sat in the city lord's mansion, not caring about what methods Fox would use to find the spy. He was only thinking about how to eliminate the bandits and obstacles on the road from Seamus City to Brettel City as soon as possible. During this time, Han Shua had placed all of his attention on the 7 grand duchies that could come back to plunder at any time. He'd actually neglected the large and small bandit groups along the way. There were more than a dozen bandit groups along the way, all of them small bandits with a few hundred, or even a few dozen members. They weren't on the same level as the big bandit groups that roamed between Brettel City and the 7 grand duchies, easily numbering in the thousands. After experiencing Trota's death last time, Han Shua had thought that these small bandits wouldn't dare act rashly, so he hadn't taken them to heart. He hadn't expected that these small bandits would stab him in the back at such a critical moment, robbing war equipment worth 100,000 gold coins. This made Han Shua want to completely annihilate them. The road between Brettel City and Seamus City was the most important passage between Brettel City and the Lancelot Empire. If Brettel City wanted to develop, the importance of this road's safety was self-evident. If the immigrants were robbed on the road before they even reached Brettel City, no one would dare to settle down in Brettel City, no matter how extravagant Han Shua's words were. "They're the ones courting death. It's not that I'm not giving them a way out," Han Shua said resolutely as he unconsciously drummed his fingers on the armrest of his chair. Fox hadn't let down Han Shua's trust in him. He'd only spent 2 hours to ferret out the spy. Han Shua hadn't seen who it was, but he'd heard waves of blood-curdling screams coming from outside the city lord's mansion. The blood-curdling screams that made one's scalp numb continued for a while before abruptly stopping. 5 minutes later, Fox walked in with reverence in his heart and bowed respectfully in front of Han Shua. Fox said in a low voice, "Lord Count, I have failed in my duties." Slightly straightening his lazy posture, Han Shua shot a cold glance at Fox and asked, "Have you interrogated them?" Nodding his head, Fox replied, a total of 3 soldiers who joined not long ago. They were all mixed in by the bandits nearby, because I saw that they were strong, plus we were short on manpower at this time. I allowed them to join the knights without a thorough investigation. This is all my negligence. Lord Count, please punish me. Just as Falk had said, Brettel City was currently in need of manpower. Talents like Falk who could both lead and train soldiers were far too lacking. Falk's momentary carelessness was indeed a dereliction of duty, but Han Shuo didn't have anyone to replace him. Han Shuo was silent for a while, then snorted coldly, "I'll remember this for now. If you can atone for your crimes in the process of surrounding and annihilating those bandits, I'll forget about your negligence of duty this time." Falk nodded heavily and solemnly saluted, saying loudly, "Don't worry, Lord Count. This kind of thing will never happen again. None of the bandits who participated in the robbery will be able to escape. As a knight, I guarantee you this." "Good. Then gather 100 of your knights. We'll make a trip to the bandits' lair and see if these bandits have the qualifications to take the 50,000 gold coins in my hands." Han Shuo narrowed his eyes as he stood up. Falk could clearly feel the thick, killing intent radiating from his body. He understood that these daring bandits would definitely pay a painful price this time. The night sky was as black as a canvas smeared with thick ink. This moonless night greatly hindered one's vision. Torches burned fiercely as they headed in a direction where the air was damp and weeds were growing. Dozens of huge wooden rafts were lined up in a long, willow leaf-shaped river. Many strong figures stood on the rafts, similarly holding torches in their hands. Noisy chatter could be heard coming from the people standing on the rafts. Falk rode on a warhorse with a torch in his hand, frowning as he looked at the bandits on the rafts in the distance. He cursed in a low voice, "Sly bandits, I didn't expect them to set this place as the transaction location. This is going to be a bit difficult." This area was quite a distance away from Brettel City. It wasn't at all between Seamus City and Brettel City, but rather in the middle of the road between Brettel City and the 7 Grand Duchies. Last time, Han Shuo had captured Helentina with 6 magic crystal cannons and returned to Brettel City from this river. However, because of the 6 heavy magic crystal cannons, it had taken him 2 days to return to Brettel City from here. This time, Han Shuo's party, which consisted purely of knights, only took half a day and arrived at the agreed location at night. It had to be said that the bandits had indeed chosen a good location this time. Once they took the 50,000 gold coins, they could quickly leave this place. Han Shuo's party, which consisted entirely of knights, would have no way of chasing them under the obstruction of the river. The location of the transaction had been announced by the bandits at the last minute. By the time Han Shuo's party knew it was this place, it was already too late to prepare. They'd unknowingly fallen into a passive position. This group of bandits isn't simple. They've arranged everything properly along the way, and even tricked us. Once they take the gold coins, they can easily escape with the help of the rafts. The knights won't be able to chase after them at all. It looks like we've really encountered a group of troublesome bandits this time. Han Shuo said to Falk as he gazed at the bandits in front of him. "My Lord Count, what should we do? Even if my lord is a necromancer, those dark creatures won't be able to move freely in the water." Falk anxiously said to Han Shuo. He was prepared to atone for his crimes and had brought out all of his enthusiasm, intending to go all out in this transaction. There are actually a few light mages on the other side. It looks like these bandits had planned this long ago. These light mages should be here specifically to guard against me. Could it be that this matter isn't that simple? Is someone scheming against us in secret? Han Shuo's demon had just passed when he first saw 2 low-ranked light mages and spoke softly with surprise. One was a light journeyman mage, and the other was an adept mage. Light mages of this level had limited use against high-ranked evil knights, but if a gargoyle that could fly approached them, even a mid to high-ranked holy light spell would be able to cause considerable damage to the gargoyle. Therefore, when Han Shuo saw the 2 light mages, he immediately became more vigilant. He waved his hand and said to Falk, "Stop for now. I'll take a look at the situation first. If this is a trap, we'll immediately retreat." By now, there was only one demon left out of the 3 that Han Shuo had refined. This made Han Shua's observation speed slower than before, and he couldn't cover the entire area like before. In his heart, Han Shua had already started to consider whether or not he should spend some time in seclusion to refine a higher-ranked mystical demon. The demon circled around the wooden raft on the river and really did discover the war equipment that Han Shua had purchased. There were even Fabian and Jack of the Buzzed Merchant Guild among them. The two of them had been tied up tightly by the bandits, with two gleaming steel blades pressed against their necks. Fabian and Jack's expressions were shriveled, and it was obvious that they'd suffered quite a bit of shock. Apart from Fabian and Jack, there were also a dozen or so merchants from various merchant guilds, as well as 30 or so captured merchant guild guards. They were all tied up tightly, with bandits guarding them from all sides. The Buzzed Merchant Guild, which had won against Cameron in a grand gamble, had become one of the Imperial Merchant Guilds. Cameron had been unable to recover from this setback, and had also lost the trust of many merchant guilds. On the contrary, the Buzzed Merchant Guild had taken advantage of the situation, gradually becoming active among the major merchant guilds. The war equipment that Han Shua had purchased this time had been transported by the Buzzed Merchant Guild in conjunction with a few other merchant guilds. If they didn't get off to a good start, it would affect their impression of Brettel City, and it would be difficult to continue their cooperation in the future. Therefore, it wasn't just Fabian and Jack. The safety of the captured merchants and merchant guild guards was equally important. If they couldn't guarantee their safety, it would be difficult to make up for the losses in the future even if they killed all of these bandits. Han Shua had a terrible headache as he looked at the bandits guarding the area closely. Dorcas, what should we do next? A burly man with a rough appearance and a height of 2 meters was obviously the leader of the bandits. He was currently on a wooden raft, facing a youth with a resolute expression and eyes that shone with the radiance of exuberant ambition. This youth was dressed like a small bandit. He was nearly 1.9 meters tall and stood ramrod straight, like a spear that would rather break than bend. The gaudy bandit attire couldn't conceal the light of ambition in his eyes at all. The youth called Dorcas glanced at the bandit leader and said confidently, "Don't worry, I've thought things through clearly. Not letting you kill these captives will give them some misgivings. Not to mention, we have the advantage of a wooden raft in this small river. The 2 light mages we hired with a large sum of money can block the gargoyles' attack. This matter is foolproof. I think they have no other way out than to pay." Dorcas, the commoner genius of the Imperial Military Academy. So it's him, no wonder. Han Shua had heard their conversation through the demon. The demon circled around the youth and murmured. Chapter 327. The nature of the Lancelot Empire's military academy was different from that of the Babylon Academy. The Lancelot Empire's academy specialized in nurturing military talents that excelled in battle strategies. Mages, swordsmen, and knights weren't part of the academy's training scope. Just like all the other academies on the profound continent, the Imperial Military Academy would always be dominated by the noble academies. The reason why there were so many noble students was because the Imperial Military Academy's exorbitant tuition fees would cause commoners to shrink back. On the other hand, even if commoners truly entered the Imperial Military Academy, it would be difficult for them to systematically learn military knowledge from the truly powerful teachers. However, nothing was absolute. The Imperial Military Academy would occasionally produce 1 or 2 commoner students. Even under such unfavorable conditions, they would still be able to stand out. Their dazzling brilliance would even steal the limelight of the noble students. Normally, these kinds of people would be accepted into the Imperial Military Academy in a variety of ways. They would be able to successfully learn under the best teachers. As long as these outstanding commoner youths were obedient and docile, there would always be nobles or generals who recognized talent recommending them to their families or subordinates. Of course, there were also some commoner youths who were rebellious and didn't know how to conceal their dazzling brilliance. In the end, they would anger other noble students. In the worst-case scenario, they would be killed by those jealous nobles. In the best-case scenario, their careers would be obstructed and they would never have the chance to enter the army. Dorcas was one of these unlucky commoner geniuses. The young Dorcas had once been incomparably dazzling in the Imperial Military Academy. Unfortunately, Because he was too rebellious and didn't know how to hide his brilliance, he fell in love with the Count's daughter and fell in love with her. This angered the Count's father and the girl's fiancé's family. The final result was that Dorcas was forcefully charged with a groundless crime. Not only was he expelled from the Imperial Military Academy, but he was also hunted down by two families and almost lost his life. He became a fugitive who couldn't see the light of day. This matter had happened a year ago. There was a description of it in the Dark Mantle's records. Back then, Han Shuo had used his authority in the Dark Mantle headquarters to look through the records and had a deep impression of it. He hadn't expected to meet this commoner military genius in such a place. Standing on the wooden raft, Dorcas' originally unruly face was now a bit gloomy because of his bitter experience. He stood ramrod straight as he gazed into the distance, turning his head to the bandit leader. Leader, those people holding torches should be people from Brettel City. After taking these 50,000 gold coins, we need to go as far away as possible. It's best if we don't appear in the vicinity of Brettel City anymore. This City Lord Brian isn't someone easy to get along with. If we don't leave in time, not only will we have to cough up the 50,000 gold coins, but we'll also lose our lives. Don't worry. I won't foolishly stay behind to be surrounded and killed by someone who can destroy Redbeard Troda and the others. Hee, let Laxi and the others suffer this person's wrath. 10,000 gold coins is enough for us to enjoy ourselves for a while. The bandit leader wasn't a fool either. He laughed rudely as he said this. He had been fooling around for a long time and was very satisfied with his share of 10,000 gold coins. Through the Een Demon, Han Shuo had seen everything. He carefully observed the wooden raft Jack, Fabian, and the others were on. After a while, he said to Falk beside him, "Take out the cart with the 50,000 gold coins and give it to them. We can't let anything happen to those merchants." "Sir Count, are we just going to give in like this? We've thought of many ways to deal with this beforehand." Falk was eager to make a contribution. He couldn't help but feel suspicious when he heard that Han Shuo was going to hand over the money without any resistance. Dorcas, the top student of the Imperial Military Academy, is there. After careful consideration, we're already at a complete disadvantage in this transaction. It's also in the water, so we have no chance to make a move without harming the merchants. Let's give them the gold coins to redeem the war equipment and merchants. We'll deal with the bandits after we've secured the merchants and equipment. Before coming over, Han Shuo had planned on using the Earth Elite Zombie to launch a sudden attack. If they were in the forest, the Wood Elite Zombie would be able to protect the merchants for a short period of time. It was a pity that the crafty Dorcas had set the location of the transaction in the river. As the Water Elite Zombie hadn't been born yet, Han Shuo had no other way to complete the transaction in the water. "All right, I'll go right now." Falk didn't have any better ideas and only nodded in response. He rode forward on his warhorse, yelling, "Move the chests of gold coins to the riverside. We're going to start trading with those bandits." This time, Han Shuo had purposely loaded the box of gold coins instead of crystal cards. His original plan was to pour the gold coins into the group of bandits before the Wood Elite Zombie and Earth Elite Zombie made their move. The bandits in the alliance would definitely be suspicious and fight over the scattered gold coins on the ground first. This way, the Earth Elite Zombie and Wood Elite Zombie would be able to make a sudden move. Han Shuo's group, who were currently in a passive position, naturally had no way of reaping this kind of effect. When the sound of gold coins clattering rang out, the bandits on the other side drove their wooden rafts closer. The bandits at the back raised their bows and aimed at the knights on the shore, while the bandits at the front slowly pushed the merchants and chariots into the slightly submerged river. Dorcas was indeed sufficiently cautious. He didn't allow the wooden rafts to reach the shore from start to finish. The merchants and chariots all fell into the water before reaching the shore, not giving Han Shuo and the others any chance to make a move. When the box of gold coins was lifted onto the wooden rafts by two bandits who had entered the water, loud cheers came from the bandits' mouths. The arrogant bandits laughed heartily in excitement, and quite a few of the bandit leaders praised Dorcas of the Imperial Academy for his strength. Dorcas, who was in charge of the plan, didn't have any joy on his resolute face. He was gloomy and apathetic from start to finish. Amidst the bandits' cheers, There was even a trace of hesitation in his eyes. It was as if this supposedly perfect plan was a humiliating and helpless move. Amidst the excited clamor, the bandits took advantage of the fact that the wooden rafts were gradually moving further and further away. When the rafts were 50 meters away from Han Shuo and the others, the torches in their hands suddenly went out. The bandits stopped laughing crazily under the berating of their leaders. The moonless sky was pitch black, and the bandits had lost their voices and torches. Apart from Han Shuo, no one could clearly see their movements from 50 meters away. These bandits didn't cross the small river to the shore, but instead rowed downstream along the river's flow. Dorcas shook his head at the bandits who were silently twisting their bodies in all sorts of strange postures to express the excitement in their hearts. He sighed softly in his heart. He didn't know if using these bandits for revenge was the right thing to do. However, he was now a fugitive. Unless he did something outrageous like betraying the Empire and defecting to another country, who would be able to help him take revenge? He was a native of the Lancelot Empire after all. No matter what, he couldn't become a traitor who would never be able to wash off this stain. Being a bandit was better than being a traitor to the Empire that everyone hated, right? Falk, immediately send them safely back to the city. This place is a bit far from the city. Don't let anything happen to you. In the pitch-black night, Han Shuo's vision was similarly affected. As the wooden rafts gradually moved further and further away, Han Shuo was about to lose sight of the bandits. When the merchants and war equipment had all been brought ashore, Han Shuo hastily instructed Falk, "My Lord Count, are we not going to chase after those damned bandits?" Falk asked after staring blankly for a moment. "If you can safely send these things and the merchants back to the city, I can't forget about your previous negligence. Remember, the outside of Brettel City isn't peaceful right now. You must be careful not to make any more mistakes." Han Shuo cautiously warned Falk when he thought of the threat of the 7 Grand Duchies returning at any time, as well as the even larger bandit groups lingering between the 7 Grand Duchies and Brettel City. Falk's main goal this time was to atone for his crimes by meritorious deeds. It was precisely because he kept this thought in mind that he'd lost his usual calm during the operation. Now that he heard Han Shuo's cautious warning, he suddenly realized that his mind was about to be completely occupied by his obsession. He immediately jumped in fright and calmly said, "My lord, please be at ease. I will safely send them back to the city." Seeing that Falk's eyes had regained clarity, Han Shuo knew that Falk had walked out of the urgent need to atone for his crimes. Only then did he relax and pat Falk's shoulder, saying in a gratified tone, "Be careful." As soon as he finished speaking, Han Shuo floated away like a gust of wind. Han Shuo's figure disappeared in a flash in the dark night. Falk and the others had no idea what Han Shuo wanted to do. "You guys use your horses to tow the carts. You guys come down and give the horses to the merchants. Hurry, take advantage of the darkness to return to the city. Keep your eyes open along the way. Everyone will be in trouble if there's even the slightest mistake." Falk loudly commanded after Han Shuo left. The knights that Falk had brought with him quickly arranged for the merchants to tie up the chariots and other equipment according to his orders, gradually returning to Brettel City. The cool night breeze blew gently. Half an hour after the wooden rafts on the river were far away from Falk's knights, the torches were once again lit. Cheers that had been forcibly suppressed suddenly rang out, incomparably ear-piercing in the silent night sky. The birds that had been quietly perching on the trees and rivers in the surroundings were startled awake, fluttering their wings in panic as they fled from their sweet dreams. Standing on a wooden raft, Dorcas' gloomy face flickered between red and dark under the flickering light of the torches. He looked at the bandit leaders who were dividing up a chest of gold coins on the other raft. He asked in an untimely manner, "When will you help me complete what you promised me?" "Don't worry, Dorcas. As long as you help us do a few more of these transactions, when we have more gold coins and we've recruited enough troops, it won't be a problem even if you want us to help you get rid of an imperial duke." One of the bandit leaders casually said perfunctorily, then said to another leader with a lewd smile, "Tuka, let's bring our brothers to the full spring garden to have some fun. These gold coins are enough for us to play to our heart's content." "Hehe, Our brothers have always wanted to go and experience it. It's a pity that the refugees in Brettel City don't have much to offer. We haven't made much money in the past few years. Now that we've struck it rich, we must enjoy it first. Laxi, I like your suggestion. Haha, let's go together. Bandit leader Tuka let out a strange laugh, rubbing his chin as he spoke. Each of these small bandit groups had at least 70 to 80 people, while the largest had less than 200 people. They'd mixed in with Brettel City and Seamis City to do some business of robbing refugees. They didn't have much ambition or future prospects, otherwise they would have long since robbed Brettel City. With the gold coins, these people weren't thinking about upgrading their subordinates to better weapons and armor. They only wanted to enjoy themselves without restraint. They didn't seem to take Dorcas's promise to heart at all. Dorcas, who'd entered the Imperial Military Academy to study, wasn't an outstanding swordsman or knight. He'd spent all of his time and energy on learning war strategies and combat techniques. Although he was 190 centimeters tall, his personal strength wasn't that great. Against these crude and barbaric bandits, this kind of person with weak intelligence couldn't pose much of a threat. However, he was able to give them advice and suggestions. Dorcas wasn't in a hurry to avenge him at all. You promised me that you'd help me get revenge when you got the gold coins, Dorcas said in a low voice, as he looked at the bandit leaders who were unscrupulously discussing which woman had the biggest breasts and which woman had the biggest buttocks. The most important thing right now is to let our brothers who've been busy for so long enjoy themselves. Dorcas, we'll talk about this later. I'll help you find a girl to enjoy yourself. She'll definitely be better than that noble lady you like. Haha. Even the leader that Dorcas was following laughed heartily without a care in the world. He didn't take Dorcas's promise seriously at all. Aha, we've arrived. We'll reach Narsen Duchy's Tulian town after a short walk ashore. The girls from Springful Garden must be waiting for us there. Laxi laughed excitedly and instructed his subordinates beside him. Hurry up and stop the rafts. Boss will take you to have some fun. Dorcas had an ugly expression on his face. He resented these untrustworthy bandits, but he knew that his strength was limited. Although he was furious, there was nothing he could do. He could only look on helplessly as all the bandits disembarked from the rafts one by one and happily made their way to Spring Garden in Tulian town. Fellow bandit friends who took my 50,000 gold coins, I've been waiting for you for a long time. Suddenly, a young man's laughter rang out in the darkness. Under the illumination of the bandits' torches, an extremely tall figure gradually appeared in front of them, blocking their path. Chapter 328. A sneer slowly fell, and an extremely tall figure gradually appeared under the illumination of the torch. It was a handsome young man with an evil smile on his face. The young man was more than 9 meters tall, and he stood there like a sharp sword that had been unsheathed, giving people a strong sense of impact. Dressed in a well-fitting green warrior suit, his refined and strong physique showed off his sharpness. The corner of his mouth curled up into a faint smile with a hint of playfulness. He was like a goshawk soaring in the sky, planning to tease the fleeing wild rabbits on the ground, appearing confident and calm. After the youth's figure appeared, the frightened bandits hurriedly looked around, as if they thought that the youth had more reinforcements behind him, so they were somewhat nervous and apprehensive. There's no need to look, it's just me, Han Shua explained with a light smile. He didn't look at the bandit leader, who had clearly let out a sigh of relief. Instead, he focused his gaze on Dorcas, who was standing ramrod straight in the middle of the crowd, and asked, "Do you think that these bandits who only know how to enjoy themselves and do nothing can help you take revenge?" Dorcas' expression was indifferent. After a moment of silence, he looked at Han Shua and said, "This has nothing to do with you. You're here for the 50,000 gold coins, right?" Han Shua smiled and shook his head. His eyes were fixed on Dorcas, and he casually said, "No, although 50,000 gold coins is a large sum of money in the eyes of these bandits, it's nothing to me. I've been following you all this time, not for the 50,000 gold coins, but for you, Dorcas." Dorcas' expression changed greatly, and he glared hatefully at Han Shua, as if he wanted to firmly imprint Han Shua's appearance in his heart. He then laughed bitterly. I didn't think that after so long, those two families would still have the thought of killing me. I just didn't think that I'd be so valuable already. Ha! Cut the crap. You're just one person, and you dare block our way? You're courting death. The bandit leader Laxi, who had been impatient to go to the full spring garden to enjoy, finally couldn't hold back his impatience after confirming that Han Shuo was indeed alone. As Laxi shouted, the other bandit leaders also agreed. It seemed that they could no longer endure the lust in their hearts. Under the orders of the bandit leaders, the equally anxious bandit minions quickly surrounded Han Shuo with weapons that were not worth a single gold coin in their hands. From start to finish, Han Shuo had a faint smile on his face. He was completely unmoved by the actions of these bandits who were eager for the girl's smooth skin. He continued to look at Dorcas and shake his head. Only when Dorcas had a puzzled expression did he open his mouth to explain, to others, "You're not only worthless, but a hot potato. But to me, you're worth far more than 50,000 gold coins. I'll talk to you about this later. After I've dealt with these bandits, we'll slowly discuss the issue of your value." Arrogant fellow, you're courting death. Laxi looked angrily at Han Shuo and waved his hand, yelling, "Kill him. He's definitely that evil necromancer. You guys are so close to him. Don't give him the chance to chant his magic." Aha! He's the new city lord of Bretel City. Look at the space ring on his hand. He must be a big fat sheep. Brothers, let's rob the space ring for me. I can already imagine the wealth inside. Bandit leader Tuka yelled in excitement. He raised the wide, double-edged battle axe in his hands and stared greedily at the space ring on Han Shuo's finger. Thump, thump, thump. Just as the bandit minions were licking their lips and preparing to tear Han Shuo to pieces, heavy footsteps suddenly sounded. What's that sound? Laxi's messy eyebrows furrowed into two irregular triangles. He looked all around him before asking loudly. The bandit minions who were about to make a move stopped in shock when they heard Laxi's shout. They looked around in confusion, not knowing what was going on. Thump, 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 thump. The heavy footsteps were getting closer and closer. A few sparse branches and leaves on the sides swayed lightly, reminding these lowly bandits that the ground was trembling. But the moonless night was pitch black, and even with torches, the distance they could illuminate was limited. Therefore, the bandits who were looking around could only hear footsteps getting louder and louder, but could not see what was gradually approaching. It's the sound of the iron hooves of the fire-breathing war beasts under the evil night. Everyone, don't look around, you're all done for. Han Shuo, who was surrounded by bandits, suddenly explained with a smile. Damn it, he's already summoned his undead creatures. Kill him immediately. As long as he's dead, the undead creatures won't be much of a threat without his command. The light adept mage hired by the bandits turned pale with fright and hastily yelled. When the panicked bandit leaders heard the light adept mage's shout, they all yelled out orders, "You idiots, hurry up and kill him." The bandit minions who had surrounded Han Shuo immediately sped up their movements when they heard their leaders give the order to kill. They brandished the cheap weapons in their hands and charged towards Han Shuo, planning to kill Han Shuo before the undead creatures arrived. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Slender jet-black bone spears shot out from the bandits' torches with Han Shuo at the center like rays of deadly black light. The speed of the bone spears was extremely fast. At first glance, the continuous bone spears looked as if they were connected together, making Han Shuo look like a demonic black peacock with its tail spread open. The bandits that were charging over let out continuous wails that sounded like concentrated firecrackers. The slender jet-black bone spears easily pierced through their armor, which was only worth a few silver coins. Under Han Shuo's spread, they either pierced deep into the gaps between their bones or directly penetrated their internal organs, causing blood to fly out. The power of the bone spears that pierced through the bandits' bodies didn't diminish in the slightest, and often had the strength to shoot another bandit behind them to death. This kind of violent impact was truly terrifying. In the blink of an eye, the 30 or so bandits that had charged up were all shot to death by the bone spears. The blood on the ground was a bewitching red under the illumination of the torches that had fallen to the ground. The thick smell of blood instantly spread to the bandit leaders' noses. No, not good. As Raxi watched Han Shuo, who was in the middle of a pool of blood and corpses, slowly float up, his feet not touching the ground, the flames of lust in Raxi's body were slowly extinguished by a bone-chilling cold. A raging flame called fear burned everything in his mind. Thump thump, the muffled sound of footsteps pounded on every bandit's heart like the beating of a drum. The things that had only been heard but not been seen all this time appeared one after another behind them. These things had pupil-less eye sockets that spewed scorching flames. Under the illumination of the burning eye sockets, enormous black shadows gradually appeared in the darkness. Tuka's lips suddenly became a bit dry, and even his voice wasn't smooth. He stammered, "Everyone, it's the evil knights. Let's run." The hands of the two light mages that had been hired with a large sum of money trembled slightly when they saw the evil knights appear. The purification effect of light magic at their level of strength was limited against these high-level undead creatures. Moreover, there were more than 10 evil knights that had appeared. With the help of the faint hazy light, the sharp-eyed mages could even see that there were even more densely packed shadows behind the 10 evil knights. These bandits had all heard of the rumor that Han Shuo's group had killed Trota's bandits at the foot of Mount Tali. However, in their understanding, this was all due to the numerous soldiers of Bretel City, as well as the mountain people that Fulkin had brought down from Mount Tali. How could they have imagined that a Grand Magus necromancer with the mental strength of a Grand Magus and a skeletal staff that could double the number of undead creatures he could summon? Just how many undead creatures would Han Shuo be able to summon? "Sorry, we don't want the commission." The light adept mage turned his head to look at Dorcas, then said to the other light journeyman mage, "Give them the gold coins." More than 1,000 gold coins were poured out of the two light mages' money pouches. The adept mage bowed slightly towards Han Shuo in the distance and said reverently, "This matter has nothing to do with us. Please let us go." "You two despicable mages, you actually dare to run away? I'll kill you first." The leader of Dorcas roared angrily, charging towards the two retreating light mages. "I don't know why, but I hate light mages more and more. In addition, I'm very disgusted by your sudden defection. I think it's best if you stay." Han Shuo looked coldly at the two mages who knew how to play it safe and sound and spoke faintly. Due to the dense barrage of bone spears, none of the bandits dared to approach Han Shuo. They all stayed as far away from Han Shuo as possible. However, there was still a large number of undead creatures closing in on them. No matter how they looked at it, they were doomed. Whoosh! A bandit close to an evil knight was picked up by one of the evil knight's bone spears. The massacre began as the bandit fell to the ground. 10 evil knights and nearly 1,000 undead creatures slowly drowned the bandits in an endless sea of death. In the night that was as dark as ink, the torches were extinguished one by one as the bandits were killed. The darkness of the night affected the bandits' vision, but the undead creatures were like fish in water in the darkness. They silently slaughtered the obstacles in front of them, not knowing the meaning of mercy at all. Dorcas, who also had a look of terror on his face amidst the wretched howls, became an anomaly in the crowd with his torch in hand. The evil night zombies walked past him one after another, but it was as if they didn't know that there was a delicious human body next to them. They only cared about slaughtering the living people around him. Dorcas, who still had his spine ramrod straight, discovered that none of the undead creatures around him attacked him. The terror in his heart gradually receded. Due to the bandits' previous treachery, Dorcas, who had been their aide, felt an indescribable sense of satisfaction as he watched the bandits being slaughtered. Good kill, good kill. These dregs should have been eliminated a long time ago. Dorcas muttered to himself as he watched the bloody massacre with an indifferent expression. Under Han Shuo's unceremonious refusal, the two light mages were the first to receive the bandits' fierce attacks. The two light mages, who had originally been able to pose a slight threat to the undead creatures, were quickly drowned out by the bandits' furious attacks. The bandits, who had drowned the two light mages with their sea of people, were then drowned by the undead creatures that surrounded them. As time passed in the pitch-black night, the mournful screams that had been incessant gradually died down. After a while, The only thing left in front of Han Shu was an indifferent Dorcas with a torch in his hand. Apart from him, there was a ground full of corpses and a few ghouls chewing on them. The scene is a bit too bloody. I hope you don't mind. Han Shua smiled as he floated towards Dorcas. The smiling Han Shua didn't seem friendly at all amidst the corpses on the ground. Instead, there was a kind of frightening eeriness to him. The ghouls chewing on the corpses on the ground took the initiative to leave Dorcas when Han Shua approached. It seemed to emphasize that all of this bloody scene originated from this young man with an evil smile. Dorcas took a deep breath, forcefully resisting the urge to vomit. He focused all of his attention on Han Shua, attempting to be indifferent to the tragic scene around him through this method. What do you want? Hee, I know a few things about you, and also understand the boundless resentment in your heart. I want to give you a chance to take revenge. Han Shua smiled as he made an extremely enticing proposal. A chance. This wasn't something that anyone could give him as a charity. Before Han Shua had displayed the ruthlessness of slaughtering all of the bandits, Dorcas wouldn't have thought that the city lord of Bretel City, who couldn't even fend for himself, would give him much of a chance. But now, Dorcas had reason to believe that as long as Han Shua was willing, a vengeance that was as difficult as ascending to the heavens for him wouldn't be difficult at all in front of this demon-like cruel man. Therefore, Dorcas only hesitated for a moment before nodding. As long as you can take revenge for me, I'll do anything you want me to. Shaking his head, Han Shua smiled as he slowly said, It's not me who will take revenge for you. It's you who will take revenge for yourself. While Dorcas was frowning, Han Shua explained with a light smile, I will give you the chance to take revenge for yourself. As long as you submit to me, with your talent and ability, those two families will be yours sooner or later. Hehe, isn't it better to torture them to death yourself than to let someone else kill them? The girl who had been in love with Dorcas had now become the enemy's plaything in bed. Because of the relationship between the girl and Dorcas, her fiancé had always treated her cruelly. The pitiful girl washed her face with tears all day long, but was powerless to do anything about it. Although the girl's family was dissatisfied, they had no right to interfere since their daughter was already married off. Not to mention that the other family's status was a bit higher. Therefore, her father had instead placed all of his resentment on Dorcas and spared no effort in hunting him down. With Dorcas' strength, it could only be said that he was lucky to be able to escape from such a pursuit. The Dark Mantle's intelligence network knew of this information, but in this world where nobles dominated the continent, even if a commoner like Dorcas had astonishing military talent, it wasn't enough to change this unspoken rule that had existed for thousands of years. The Dark Mantle would only kill nobles who had rebelled against the Empire. However, it wasn't a big deal for a noble to occasionally bully a few commoners. If the commoner didn't have any backing, then it was even more of a small matter. The Dark Mantle had countless things to do, so they naturally wouldn't waste their energy on this kind of thing. Being able to make a few sketches in the intelligence report was already giving face to Dorcas' military talent. Otherwise, there probably wouldn't even be a record. I am a fugitive. How can I kill my enemies with my own strength? Dorcas was obviously tempted by Han Shua's suggestion. However, being able to show off his abilities in the Imperial Academy meant that he was no fool. After a moment of silence, he looked at Han Shua and asked, In Bretel City, whether or not you are a fugitive is up to me, the city lord. I know your identity and hatred. Since I dared to accept you, I'm not afraid of your status as a fugitive. Han Shua smiled faintly and pointed in the direction of the 7 Grand Duchies. He said enticingly, Apart from the thick hatred in your eyes, I can also see an unconcealable wild ambition. To the 7 Grand Duchies, Bretel City is a hunting ground. However, to me, the 7 Grand Duchies are also a hunting ground. Are you willing to become a hunter like me? Dorcas looked deeply at Han Shua. After a while, he didn't care about the pool of blood on the ground and kowtowed towards Han Shua. He said in a low voice, My Lord Count, I am not a hunter, but I will be your hunting dog. Chapter 329. The sky hadn't brightened yet. Amidst the soft purple and white of dawn, the light of dawn slowly washed away the darkness in the sky. A cool breeze blew gently, and the golden sun gradually burst forth with rays of light after a while. When Han Shuo and Dorcas returned to Bread El City, they were surprised to find that Fok's group of knights had also just arrived. Han Shuo could see traces of battle on their bodies, some of them even gone forever. Dorcas rode a weak warhorse that he'd obtained from the bandits, following Han Shuo at a moderate pace as he entered Bretel City. The first thing he saw were the two extremely intimidating magic crystal cannons on the city walls. The previously dilapidated city walls had not only been repaired, but they were now bright and clean. Even the height of the city had been increased. From a distance, Dorcas actually felt that Bread El City was a bit more magnificent. Nodding inwardly, Dorcas turned his head to look at Han Shuo, who had a somewhat gloomy expression on his face as he quickly entered the city. He understood that the reason Bread El City could have such a change was all thanks to this new city lord. What's going on? Did some unforeseen event happen again? Where are the merchants and the war equipment? Han Shuo floated over like a ghost. His cold voice floated over along with the cool morning breeze, scaring the still shaken Fok. When Fok turned around and saw that it was Han Shuo, he breathed a sigh of relief. He hastily straightened his body and explained, "My lord, there was indeed an accident on the way. Our torches attracted the attention of the bandits roaming in the night. Fortunately, that area is close to Mount Tali. Before the bandits arrived, the leader of the mountain people, Fulkin, came down the mountain to help us. The merchants and the war equipment are safe and sound. Only 3 knights were killed." Han Shua's tense heart slowly calmed down when he heard that the merchants and the city's defense equipment were safe. He looked at Fok and nodded. His tone softened a bit as he said, "Bury the dead knights. Before the 7 Grand Duchies arrive at Bretel City, our first task is to annihilate all the bandits in the surroundings." "Rest assured, my lord. I, Fok, guarantee that I will avenge my brothers." Fok's tone was resolute as he drew his sword and pointed it at the sky, making a solemn vow. Dorcas rode on a frail warhorse and approached with the sound of clattering steps. He'd already carefully examined the surrounding defensive measures along the way, a pensive look in his eyes. When he arrived in front of Han Shuo, he finally shifted his gaze to Han Shuo and suggested, "Before Bretel City and Semis City, there were a total of 17 bandit groups. Apart from the 5 that you annihilated last night, there are currently 12 groups left. These bandits aren't large, but are as annoying as flies. I think you should eliminate them first. Otherwise, the merchants will be in danger in the future." "City Lord, are all those greedy bandits dead?" Fok inquired after hearing Dorcas' words. Nodding, Han Shuo replied, "That's right. Those 5 bandit groups are finished. Let me introduce you. This is Dorcas from the Imperial Military Academy. Perhaps you've heard of his deeds before. From today onwards, he's your colleague. No one is allowed to mention his status as a fugitive in the future." "Yes, my lord," Fok immediately replied, looking at Dorcas with admiration in his eyes. However, he didn't ask Han Shuo how Dorcas had joined Bretel City. This time, from the robbery to the transaction, it had all been planned by this person. From start to finish, Dorcas had held the initiative, toying with them in the palm of his hand. Even Han Shuo had to hand over 50,000 gold coins in the end. This person's intelligence was truly outstanding. Take out 1,000 of the 3,000 knights you've trained and give them to Dorcas. Dorcas will be the captain." Han Shuo instructed Fok, then stared at Dorcas. "Dorcas, clean up the remaining 12 bandit groups between Bretel City and Semis City." Dismounting from his frail warhorse, Dorcas performed a standard military salute towards Han Shuo, replying succinctly, "Yes." Nodding, Han Shuo once again looked at Fok, saying, "I'll hand over this batch of city defense equipment to you and place them in the appropriate positions. During this time, properly handle this matter. In addition, look after Bretel City for me. Prepare to deal with the bandits and the 7 Grand Duchies attacks at any time." "Don't worry, my lord. With this batch of city defense equipment, I'll make anyone who dares to fish in Bretel City pay the price in blood." Fok guaranteed. Right. Where did you arrange for the merchants?" Han Shuo suddenly thought of little fatty Jack and Fabian, whom he hadn't seen in a long time, I've arranged for them to be in the City Lord's mansion. The City Lord's mansion is large enough, and its security is second to none in Brettel City. Therefore, I arranged for the noble merchants to be there. Falk replied, Well done. I won't pursue the matter of you neglecting your duties. Dorcas has just arrived in Brettel City. Take him to familiarize him with the various places in Brettel City. Put 1,000 soldiers under his command. Han Shua instructed, nodding to Dorcas and leaving through the city gates. After a while, Han Shua appeared in the City Lord's mansion. He'd arranged for a few dozen people to stay in the mansion. The merchants had all fallen into a deep sleep like dead pigs after the fright. Occasionally, one or two would be awakened by nightmares in broad daylight, their bodies drenched in cold sweat. Little Fatty Jack from the Buzzed Merchant Guild was desperately hugging a pillow, drool dripping from the corners of his mouth as he slept soundly. Han Shua silently arrived in front of Little Fatty Jack, revealing a knowing smile as he looked at his unsightly sleeping appearance. In the Necromancy Major of the Babylon Academy of Magic and Force, Han Shua still remembered how he and Little Fatty Jack had swiftly swept the floor with a broom. He still remembered that Little Fatty had secretly hidden some black bread for him to eat when he'd been weak and had yet to master his magical arts. He still remembered how they'd fought together against the other necromancy students. After more than 2 years, Little Fatty Jack hadn't actually changed much. He was still as simple and honest as ever, except that the fat on his body had increased. The one who had changed was Han Shua himself. In the span of 2 years, Han Shua had grown from an errand boy in the necromancy major to the point where no one dared to look down on him, be it in terms of intelligence or strength. In one dangerous battle after another, his magical arts and mental strength had rapidly grown. Han Shua, who'd hovered between life and death many times, had broken through again and again to become a city lord with the title of Count. As for that little fatty who'd been gluttonous and greedy all day, he was still working as an accountant at the Buzzed Merchant Guild. This kid eats and drinks well in the Buzzed Merchant Guild and won't encounter any danger. Phoebe even takes special care of him for my sake. Although his life isn't exactly exciting, it's probably quite comfortable. Han Shua looked at the little fatty who was drooling in his sleep and smiled as he muttered to himself. Without waking up Little Fatty Jack, who was sleeping soundly, Han Shua looked at Jack through the window for a while and prepared to leave for now. He'd talk again after they'd slept. Han Shua had only taken a few steps when he suddenly heard a loud yell from Fabian's room. Han Shua entered Fabian's room like a ghost and suddenly found Fabian sitting up on his bed, drenched in sweat. His face was full of lingering fear. It turned out that he'd had a terrifying nightmare. When he saw Han Shua suddenly walk in, Fabian, who'd just woken up from his nightmare, cried out involuntarily again. He only abruptly stopped his panicked yells when he saw that the person was Han Shua. He flashed an ugly smile at Han Shua and said a bit embarrassedly, I've been too used to following the mist these past few years. I've only discovered that I'm more and more afraid of death now that I've suddenly encountered danger. Perhaps it's because I'm old and no longer yearn for grand adventures. I just want to live a peaceful life in peace. Han Shua recalled the scene of their first meeting after Fabian's words and revealed a relaxed smile. Han Shua found a chair for himself and sat down, saying to Fabian, This is how life is. If you want to obtain more wealth and a more illustrious position, you must pay greater risks. Heh, it's because of my negligence that you've met with such an accident this time. It's a good thing that no one's hurt, otherwise I really wouldn't be able to forgive myself. Apart from Fabian and Jack, the rest of the merchants were only doing this because they were beneficial to Han Shua. If those merchants had died, Han Shua would only feel regret and immediately think of ways to make up for the crisis of trust that might arise from their deaths with the other merchants. However, Han Shua had feelings for Jack and Fabian, especially Jack. He'd been Han Shua's best friend when he had nothing. If he lost his life because of Han Shua's negligence, he would never be able to forgive himself. Perhaps he'd be crushed by self-blame in a short period of time. Fabian looked at the imposing youth in front of him, who was more than 9 meters tall, and tried to merge him with the thin shadow in the dark forest. However, he discovered that he couldn't merge the two even though they were clearly one person. This wasn't because of the difference in body size and height. Time could change everything. Fabian couldn't help but lament that he was becoming more and more timid as he grew older. However, the Han Shuo in front of him had grown from a youth to a youth that no one dared to look down on. Han Shuo's strength was growing stronger and stronger, and he was gradually making a name for himself in the upper class of the empire. His Majesty the King had dared to let him take over the terrible mess that was Brettel City. This was definitely not a demotion, as outsiders who didn't understand the situation would think. This should be the sharpening of an unstoppable sword. Fabian looked at the youth in front of him whose eyes were deep and whose thoughts were becoming more and more indecipherable. He suddenly had a flash of enlightenment. This is a letter that Miss Phoebe asked me to personally deliver to you. Fabian took out a letter with the color of roses on it and a faint fragrance curling around it, handing it over to Han Shuo in a slightly respectful manner. All right, old Fabian, you can continue to rest. Those frightened merchants still need you to wake up and help pacify them. Brettel City has 100 businesses waiting to flourish. Our cooperation with the major merchant guilds will definitely become closer in the future. Apart from weapons and equipment that we currently lack, we will also need an unending supply of food and medicine in the future. We will still need to trouble you for this. Han Shuo put away the fragrant letter and said to Fabian with a smile, "Hee, with your and Miss Phoebe's light attribute, the Buzzed Merchant Guild will definitely support Brettel City with all its might." Fabian understood the relationship between the two and winked at Han Shuo, teasing him without losing his sense of humor. "Of course, I won't mistreat the Buzzed Merchant Guild. Including your president Phoebe?" Han Shuo said with a smile and walked out of Fabian's room with a cheerful expression. The open door was slowly closed by a force after Han Shuo's figure had gone far away. He's becoming more and more powerful. Miss is indeed a true merchant, knowing to invest everything in him before he succeeds. It looks like the Buzzed Merchant Guild will definitely become even more glorious in Miss's hands. Fabian murmured thoughtfully as he watched the door close automatically despite the lack of wind. "Phoebe, oh Phoebe, I've received your longing." In Han Shuo's own room, Han Shuo muttered to himself with a doting smile after he finished reading the fragrant letter. ******. 3 days later, Brettel City was brimming with a joyous atmosphere. The city lord's mansion at the center of the city was filled with laughter and chatter. The food festival wasn't a big festival in the Lancelot Empire. However, since the merchants had safely arrived in Brettel City, and Han Shuo wanted to spread some information through their mouths, the food festival was treated with great importance. Long tables over 10 meters long were put together in front of the city lord's mansion. All kinds of exquisite desserts and delicious, steaming hot food were sent out from the mansion's wide-open doors. Any commoner in Brettel City could freely enjoy these free foods and gorge themselves to their heart's content. The civilians who heard the news went from doubtful at first to frenzied. The transition time did not take more than 10 seconds. The knights in shining armor maintained the order with a polite smile on their faces. Within the city lord's mansion, even more exquisite delicacies were placed on the luxurious sandalwood round tables. The merchants who'd escaped death enjoyed the food to their heart's content under Han Shuo's hospitality. Fabian of the Buzzed Merchant Guild seemed to have become half the host, helping Han Shuo entertain these guests who'd come from afar. Amidst laughter and chatter, he stuffed the gold coins they deserved for the war chariots and equipment into their palms. The merchants who'd received their rewards were beaming with joy, praising the refined and smiling Han Shuo endlessly. They declared that this business was only a good start. As long as Han Shuo needed anything, it would be delivered to him in an endless stream. Ladies and gentlemen, Han Shuo's loud and clear voice reverberated through the entire hall, holding a crystal cup of red wine in his hand. The mercenary merchants were in a good mood after receiving their rewards. One by one, they stopped their cheerful chatter and looked at the extraordinary bearing of Han Shuo with smiles, waiting for Han Shuo to continue. When the clamor gradually died down, Han Shuo smiled and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, this business is only the beginning. Brettel City needs an endless supply of goods. The ores mined from the surrounding mountains and rivers are also priceless. In the future, everyone will definitely be able to obtain even more wealth in the city. After a pause, the smile on Han Shua's face receded. He raised his voice somewhat solemnly and said, as a city that's been ravaged by bandits and foreign countries for many years, Bretel City has experienced too many hardships and sufferings. There's never been a city in the Lancelot Empire that has endured more pain and humiliation than Bretel City. His Majesty bestowed Bretel City to me. While my heart is heavy, I also bear the mission of making Bretel City prosper once again. However, my strength alone is limited. I will create good conditions for everyone so that everyone can obtain what they need in Bretel City. The merchants weren't stingy with applause that didn't cost them money. After the rain-like applause, the banquet that wasn't too sumptuous continued. Little Fatty Jack and Fabian walked together in front of Han Shua. Jack raised his head to look at the imposing Han Shua and said, "Brian, I don't want to stay in Austin City anymore. That's too boring and unexciting. Let me stay in Bretel City. I can help you." Han Shua was stunned. He subconsciously raised his cup and clinked it with Jack, draining the last drop of wine in his cup. He hesitated for a moment before slowly saying, "Jack, only the two of us know how deep our relationship is. It's not that I don't want you to stay, but Bretel City is a dangerous place. Your life may be in danger at any time. As a true friend, I advise you to stay in the Buzzed Merchant Guild. At least you'll always be safe and worry-free." The fat on Jack's face shook as he shook his head. He glanced at the equally surprised Fabian beside him and said, "The Buzzed Merchant Guild is too dull. I'm still very young, Miss Phoebe, and you have always taken care of me, and I'm very grateful." However, Jessica said that the person she likes should be a knight or a noble with rich experience. "I also feel that I should work harder. Miss Phoebe can't make me a knight or a noble, but perhaps Brian can." Han Shua was speechless. He hadn't thought that because of a girl, this usually cowardly little fatty Jack would actually have a dangerous item called ambition in his heart. Chapter 330. Jack, are you really prepared to face danger? Fabian could see Jack's youthful drive from him. Recalling Jack's heroic spirit of not fearing danger, Fabian sighed and asked Jack. Nodding his head heavily, Jack stubbornly said, "Yes, I've decided." Seeing Jack so insistent, Fabian shook his head and didn't say anything else. He understood that Jack had truly grown up. Perhaps it wouldn't be a bad thing for him to temper himself at this age. Not to mention that Fabian understood that Han Shua would definitely take care of Jack and wouldn't let Jack get hurt. Fabian's silence indicated that he was at least no longer opposed. When Jack looked at Han Shua expectantly, Han Shua, who was half a head taller than Jack, walked in front of him and patted Jack's shoulder, saying sincerely, "Don't be in a hurry to make a decision. Stay in Bretel City for a few days. Let me know when you've thought it through." Bretel City wouldn't be peaceful during this time. Perhaps Jack would automatically dispel this idea when he truly experienced the cruelty of war, Han Shua thought to himself. Han Shua didn't continue this topic with Jack afterwards. Instead, he became interested in the girl Jack liked called Jessica and asked a few questions about this girl. From Jack's stammering narration, Han Shua learned that this girl called Jessica was the daughter of a minor noble. Her father had met Jack when he was doing business with the Buzzed Merchant Guild. Up until now, Jack had only had a one-sided crush on her. Jack, who was only an accountant at the Buzzed Merchant Guild, was naturally unable to attract the attention of this noble daughter. Not to mention that apart from his fat body, Jack didn't have any assets to be proud of. Jack had also indirectly gotten Jessica's request for a partner from Jessica. In this profound continent where nobles dominated, even the owner of the Buzzed Merchant Guild, Phoebe, wasn't accepted by the upper class, let alone a lowly accountant like him. Therefore, on one hand, it was out of his fanatical love for Jessica, and on the other hand, perhaps because Jack truly had the desire to improve himself. That was why he hoped to borrow Han Shua's help. The banquet ended in a joyous atmosphere. The commoners outside the city lord's mansion were still unwilling to disperse after hearing the news. The allure of free food was far beyond Han Shua's imagination. The servants he'd recruited this time were busy for an entire day, but still couldn't supply enough food. They dragged it out until the sun had set and night was about to fall. Only then did the commoners disperse under the amicable persuasion of the knights. The moon that had disappeared last night was incomparably bright tonight, as if it wanted to make up for yesterday's laziness. Standing on the tallest clock in the city, Han Shua looked down at Bretel City shrouded in the misty moonlight. The vast Bretel City covered an enormous area. Houses stood in great numbers between the four city gates. It was completely capable of accommodating millions of people. The original purpose of Bretel City's construction was to serve as a base point for invading the 7 Grand Duchies. Even after experiencing vicissitudes and humiliation, Bretel City still possessed an impressive height. If it hadn't suffered repeated failures during the invasion of the 7 Grand Duchies and suffered fatal damage from the allied forces of the 7 Grand Duchies, Bretel City would have become one of the most secure cities in the Lancelot Empire. Large amounts of gold coins had been invested. Han Shua didn't hesitate to raise the height of the newly renovated Bretel City. The 6 magic crystal cannons on the city walls were a great deterrent. Now, even more war chariots and catapults had been added to the originally empty city walls. All kinds of heavy firepower equipment had been set up. Unknowingly, Bretel City, this enormous war machine that should have revealed its malevolence long ago, had begun to slowly bare its sinister fangs after millions of gold coins had been invested. It was ready to crush any arrogant person who dared to invade at any time. In the direction of Seamus City, a company of 1,000 soldiers gradually returned. The weapons of this company belonging to Dorcas were bright and shiny. Compared to the weapons of the random bandits from last night, they couldn't even be mentioned in the same breath. Every longsword was worth at least 3 gold coins, while the armor and helmets were all forged from fine steel, worth 5 gold coins. In addition to the nimble, sharp weapons like crossbows and daggers, every soldier's equipment was worth 10 gold coins. However, these soldiers that should have been knights had temporarily become foot soldiers due to the lack of warhorses. Warhorses were a scarce resource even in the Lancelot Empire. Although the 7 Grand Duchies were experts in raising warhorses, it was a pity that Han Shuak didn't have the means to purchase them. Under the leadership of Dorcas, 1,000 soldiers marched towards Bretel City in an orderly manner. These people had obviously experienced many battles. Their expressions were cold and detached, and their eyes were filled with hidden madness. Although their armor and weapons were polished to a dazzling shine, the bloodstains under their breastplates were extremely obvious. Han Shua, who was looking into the distance from the highest point of the city lord's mansion, looked at Dorcas for a while. He said in a low voice with satisfaction, "In 3 days, all 12 bandit groups have been annihilated. Out of the 1,000 soldiers, 960 have returned. Only 40 have died. What a talent!" Half an hour later, Dorcas had changed into a clean set of clothes and arrived at the city lord's mansion under the bright moonlight. He was received by Han Shua in his living room. "Dorcas, you did well." As for the worthless weapons, they were temporarily hoarded in one of the bandits' lair because they weren't worth much and were heavy. I didn't think there was a need to bring them back, so I left them there. "Good, very good. You've thought things through. Get up. I'll remember your great contribution in this matter. As long as you continue like this, you'll get what you need sooner or later." Han Shua looked deeply at Dorcas, saying, "Bretel City is a stage for you. It looks like you've gradually adapted to your role. Our empire's armies have invaded the 7 Grand Duchies many times to no avail, but since we're standing here now, we must seize this opportunity to soar to the top at all costs. We'll show those mediocre people of the empire what they can't do. This lowly one swears to follow my lord to the death," Dorcas shouted in a low voice, straightening his spine in front of Han Shua like another invincible demon's lair edge. "All right, you may leave. Keep these gold coins for now. Consider them your pay for equipping the weapons and armor of those 700 new soldiers." Han Shua motioned for Dorcas to leave. After Dorcas left, Han Shua sank into deep thought. He thought about Dorcas' words about the appropriate amount of conciliation and felt that Dorcas' words did indeed make some sense. The next day, early in the morning, Dick hurriedly came to see Han Shua, reporting to Han Shua, "My lord, several bandit groups of the same size as Troda are currently gathered in a dense forest 20 miles in front of Bretel City. This lowly one received this news from a Dark Mantle member who was on a mission in the 7 Grand Duchies. I heard that there are 15,000 bandit groups this time, and they're preparing to wildly plunder our city. They should be here soon. Han Shuo snorted coldly, saying, "Send people to pay close attention to their movements. 15,000 bandits. This will be the first true challenge to Brettel City." "My lord, do you want this lowly one to notify the mountain chief on the mountain? With just 3,000 soldiers defending Brettel City, it's too dangerous this time. The mountain chiefs might even help us," Dick suggested. Shaking his head, Han Shuo said, "Not for now. This is a test for us. Whether or not we can make them behave in the future will depend on the results of this battle." "Humph, although we only have 3,000 soldiers, the current Brettel City is no longer the same dilapidated city walls as before. I've spent so many gold coins. How can Brettel City be so easily breached?" The reason why Han Shuo dared to say this was because he had some confidence. The soldiers hiding on top of the tall city walls could use the heavy firepower of war chariots and catapults to bombard the city. The other 6 magic crystal cannons weren't to be trifled with. In the worst-case scenario, Han Shuo could still summon the undead army to participate in the battle. Han Shuo believed that it wouldn't be so easy for 15,000 bandits to breach the current Brettel City. Before anyone knew it, Brettel City had already become under martial law. Soldiers were often seen dragging huge rocks on the streets. But for some reason, the huge war chariots and magic crystal cannons that the commoners saw every day were pulled to the back with gray cloth, as if they were afraid of being discovered. Towards this new city lord, the commoners were indifferent at the beginning, but now they gradually became more interested. The news of the annihilation of the bandits on Mount Tali, as well as the annihilation of a dozen bandit groups between Seamis City and Brettel City, had long since spread throughout Brettel City through deliberate propaganda. In addition to the endless supply of food from the city lord's mansion during the food festival yesterday, the commoners in the city had had a great feast. Their resistance towards the new city lord had gradually lessened. However, they were already used to the city lord's betrayal at critical times. Before the true crisis arrived, would this new city lord be able to withstand the test? Was he worthy of their trust? It was still an unknown at the moment. Therefore, these commoners hadn't truly opened their hearts to the new city lord yet. They only observed the changes in Brettel City silently. Another day passed, and all 4 of Brettel City's city gates were closed. No merchants or commoners were allowed to leave. The sparse soldiers on the 4 city gates were all vigilant. Several squads of knights patrolled back and forth on their war horses without rest. Although these knights didn't say much, the commoners of Brettel City, who had experienced the pain of war, could already smell a familiar scent from these traces. War was coming. Chapter 331. On the plains 10 miles away from Brettel City, 4 bandit groups were slowly making their way towards Brettel City. Unlike the small bandit groups that roamed between Brettel City and Seamis City, the Bloodfang bandits, with the smallest number of bandits, had more than 2,000 people. The Green Fire bandits, with the largest number, had more than 6,000 people. Their numbers were double that of Brettel City's city guards. These bandit groups were the same as the exterminated Redbeard bandits of Troda. They were calamities that frequently roamed the cities and towns of the 7 Grand Duchies. Wherever they went, the cities and towns of the 7 Grand Duchies that had been looted would be swept clean. Since the 7 Grand Duchies were constantly at war with each other, and there were many mountains and hills between the 7 Grand Duchies that they could hide in, these bandits were like fish in water. They had become vermin that the 7 Grand Duchies abhorred. Unlike ordinary bandit groups, these bandits were well equipped. Some of them were originally military officers from the 7 Grand Duchies. They brought their subordinates to join the bandits because they were at odds with the nobles of their duchies or had committed some serious crime. These people were originally regular soldiers. Although they'd become bandits, their discipline and combat knowledge hadn't been neglected at all. After becoming bandits, the wealth they'd plundered was used to equip their soldiers and war horses. Their equipment and combat strength weren't any weaker than the regular armies of the 7 Grand Duchies. The 4 bandit groups that had come to Brettel City this time were the Green Fire Bandits, the Tomahawk Bandits, the Wyvern Bandits, and the Bloodfang Bandits. The Tomahawk Bandits and the Wyvern Bandits had more than 4,000 people and 3,000 people respectively. They were bloodthirsty bandits that had been tempered for a long time. At this time, the leaders of the four bandit groups were walking in the middle of the group, still discussing matters regarding the attack on Bretel City. Is Bretel City really as rich as you say it is? I just went there half a year ago. There didn't seem to be anything valuable there apart from stones. The brothers that went with me didn't get anything. The leader of the Bloodfang Bandits, Rains, said with some skepticism. This time, Rains had been invited by the other three. He had originally planned to take action against a small town in Helen Duchy. If it wasn't for the fact that he understood that the other three were even more greedy, Rains definitely wouldn't have been willing to participate in Bretel City's plundering operation. Bretel City is different from before. It's said that the new city lord is extremely wealthy. He even robbed that bitch Helen of Helen Duchy's magic crystal cannon. There are even rumors that Helen was raped by the new city lord. Damn it, that Helen is a famous beauty in the 7 Grand Duchies, and she's also the Grand Duke of Helen Duchy. I didn't expect that the new city lord would actually steal her first prize. It's really inconceivable. The leader of the Tomahawk Bandits, Bynum, was a boorish man who was over 2 meters tall. He carried a huge tomahawk that was 1.5 meters long on his back. His exposed skin and fur made him look like a half-orc. Lions, I've received accurate information. Bretel City is definitely different from before. Just the 6 magic crystal cannons alone are worth 600,000 gold coins. Adding the gold coins from the city lord and the merchants, Bretel City now has at least 1 million gold coins. The leader of the Green Fire Bandits, Fass, explained to Rains. Fass had once been a high-ranking military officer in Forest Duchy, one of the 7 Grand Duchies. He'd made a name for himself in the battles between the 7 Grand Duchies, but he'd been dismissed because he'd wantonly slaughtered captives in battle. When he'd received the news, Fass had simply led his subordinates to do the robbing business. After switching from a high-ranking military officer to a bandit, Fass had become even more like a fish in water. He'd expanded the Green Fire Bandits to over 6,000 members, no longer subject to anyone's restrictions. Among the 4 bandit groups, Fass Green Fire Bandits not only had the most members, but also the strongest combat strength. After all, Fass had once been a regular soldier and had a set of methods for leading troops into battle. After hearing Fass' explanation, the other 3 bandits, including the sinister-looking leader of the Flying Dragon Bandits, Afai, all revealed greedy gazes. 1 million gold coins was a large sum in anyone's eyes. Not to mention these greedy bandits, even the dukes of the 7 Grand Duchies would come to plunder the city if they found out, right? Fass is indeed amazing. Haha, 1 million gold coins. Just based on Bretel City's defensive measures, we've really struck it rich this time. Battleaxe's Bynum laughed maniacally, as if he could see a sky full of gold coins raining down on him. Afai of the Flying Dragon Bandits glanced at Bynum disdainfully, thinking, what an idiot. If Bretel City was so easy to attack, why didn't the equally cruel and greedy Fass swallow it all for himself? Why would he be so kind as to invite us to share the profits? Among the 4 great bandits, although Fass was cruel and greedy, and had a way of leading troops into battle, his personality wasn't too sinister, nor was he that scheming. On the other hand, the leader of the Flying Dragon Bandits, Afai, was nicknamed the Poison Dragon. This poison referred to how vicious and poisonous his heart was, and how he was extremely adept at using despicable and sinister tricks. Afai's mind spun for a moment when he heard Fass mention the 1 million gold coins. He secretly made up his mind. When they arrived at Bretel City, he definitely couldn't be the main force. At the very least, he had to observe the situation first, lest he accidentally throw away the capital he'd painstakingly accumulated. With the temptation and yearning for gold coins, the bandits of the 4 bandit bands wore clothes of different colors as they gradually made their way to Bretel City. The tall and magnificent city walls towered in front of them. The newly renovated city walls no longer had a single hole in them. From the outside, Bretel City seemed to have the faint shadow of a firm defensive line. Oh, Bretel City has really changed a lot. I remember the last time I came here, There were some holes in front of the city gates. The walls weren't this tall either. We easily broke through and didn't meet any decent resistance. It looks like Brettel City is indeed different. Lance couldn't help but exclaim in surprise as he raised his head to look at Brettel City. Fass, where are the magic crystal cannons you were talking about? The leader of the battle-axe bandits, Bynum, firmly remembered that the magic crystal cannons were worth 600,000 gold coins. He didn't think too much about the terrifying might of the magic crystal cannons. He was only thinking about how to exchange the cannons for dazzling gold coins after obtaining them. Every time he imagined the scene of him drowning in gold coins, Bynum felt a sense of satisfaction. Fass didn't immediately answer Bynum's question from atop his tall warhorse. Instead, he ordered the Green Fire Bandits behind him to line up and prepare for battle at a moment's notice. When the Green Fire Bandits were all ready, Fass gazed at the distant city walls. He discovered that there really didn't seem to be any magic crystal cannons on the tall city walls. Fass furrowed his brows and thought for a moment before saying, "The magic crystal cannons are definitely in Brettel City. You only need to remember this. Brettel City has a total of 4 city gates. Each of our 4 groups will attack 1 gate each. According to our previous agreement, we will attack Brettel City together after seeing my signal. Brettel City's city guard only has 3,000 people. Each gate can only be defended by 1,000 people at most. You've all heard of their combat strength. As long as you spread out your troops when attacking, the magic crystal cannons won't be able to cause much damage to you. In addition, the magic crystal cannons require magic crystal ores to fill them. There are still gaps between each shot. They may not have enough magic crystal ores, so you don't need to be afraid. As long as any of our 4 groups break through the city walls, Brettel City will be finished with our strength. There may be some casualties this time, but think about the 1,000,000 gold coins. Those dazzling gold coins are piled up in the city lord's mansion. If we want them, how can we not shed some blood?" When Jack heard Han Shua's words, he agreed without the slightest hesitation. But now that he was truly standing on top of the tall city walls and looking at the well-equipped and fierce-looking bandits, his heart still trembled a bit. "What? Scared?" Han Shua laughed lightly and teased Jack. Suddenly puffing out his chest, Jack shouted as if trying to convince himself, "What's there to be afraid of? I'm just a bit nervous for the first time. Besides, I'll only be a financial officer in Brettel City. It's not like I need to fight on the battlefield. What's there to be afraid of?" "Very good. If you can persevere until the end of this battle and remain as strong as you are now, I guarantee that you'll be able to obtain that noble Lady Jessica." Han Shua chuckled. When he heard Han Shua mention Jessica, little Fatty Jack's eyes first dimmed, but it was immediately replaced with determination. He nodded heavily and clenched his chubby hands, looking at Han Shua. "Brian, although I can't become a knight, I will definitely become a noble." Han Shua smiled without saying a word. He gazed at the Green Fire Bandits in the distance. They were using some simple wooden frames to erect a tall wooden tower. With the help of the bandits, a dozen or so magi of various elements gradually walked up to the top of the tower. The strongest among these magicians was a lightning archmage. The rest were minor magicians of various elements. Magicians were rare and could be put in important positions by any country on the continent. The degree to which they were put in important positions depended on the level of their strength. It was said that the reason the Green Fire Bandits had a lightning archmage was because they had kidnapped the archmage's family to threaten him. Otherwise, an archmage naturally wouldn't be willing to be an accomplice of a lowly bandit. The mages on the wooden tower were equipped with extraordinary equipment. Not only were their magic robes exceptionally exquisite, but each of them was also equipped with an expensive magic staff. It seemed that Fass had invested quite a bit in them. Thinking about it, it made sense. Mages were extremely useful in battle. A bandit band with mages would naturally greatly increase their strength. In addition, for a bandit leader, having an archmage in his band was also a symbol of status. The wooden tower was 600 meters away from Han Shua, and there were pulleys at the bottom of the tower that could be pushed. A few bandits also climbed up the wooden tower with shields in hand, protecting the precious mages in the center so that they could cast their magic without worry. When the battle really started, They could use the wheels under the tower to push it closer to the city walls, allowing the mages to better cast their magic on Bretel City. 600 meters wasn't an unreachable distance for Han Shuo with the Demon's Lair Edge. Once the Demon's Lair Edge flew out, the mages within 600 meters would definitely be caught off guard and suffer disastrous casualties. However, the battle had yet to start. It wouldn't be wise for Han Shuo to release the Demon's Lair Edge at this time. Therefore, he could only watch helplessly as they finished setting up the wooden tower. When the wooden tower was set up, the bandits also pushed out 4 ballistae that could fire 6 bolts in a row. These ballistae had a range of around 500 meters and could fire 6 bolts with astonishing penetrative power. Han Shuo had also purchased 20 of these from the Buzzed Merchant Guild this time. Currently, there were 5 hidden on the city walls. Han Shuo was well aware of the penetrative power of these ballistae. Jack, when the battle starts, don't leave my side no matter what. I can guarantee your safety within 10 meters of me. Once you're 10 meters away from me, immediately get down on the ground and climb into the city walls. Do you understand? When he saw that the bandits actually had ballistae, Han Shuo immediately turned to look at little fatty Jack and cautiously instructed him. Jack became a bit nervous after hearing Han Shuo's words. He hastily moved a bit closer to Han Shuo, almost touching Han Shuo's body. He said in a dry voice, "Don't worry, I'll follow you wherever you go." After the wooden tower and the ballistae were pushed out, the leader of the Green Fire Bandits, Fass, stood out with an arrogant expression on his face. He raised his head and shouted at Han Shuo, "Bretel City Lord Brian, you know why we brothers have come. Our living conditions aren't good, and we've been starving recently. As long as you take out 1,000,000 gold coins, we brothers will turn around and leave. We won't touch a single hair of Bretel City." Pitiful Mr. Fass, I deeply sympathize with your group's misfortune. However, Bretel City is famous for its barrenness. The commoners in my territory don't even have enough to eat. I really can't take out 1,000,000 gold coins. Han Shuo sighed with a distressed expression. His voice wasn't loud or soft, but the bandits in the distance and the soldiers on the city walls all heard him clearly. Even some of the nearby citizens of Bretel City heard him. Many of the more courageous citizens even came out of their houses to listen carefully. Some even tried to go to the city gates to see what was going on. Then how many gold coins can you take out? Fass froze for a moment when he heard that Han Shuo's words seemed to leave room for negotiation. There wasn't a single hole in Bretel City right now. Although there weren't many soldiers on the tall city walls, they were all equipped with shiny weapons. He'd heard that Bretel City Lord Brian was also a necromancer. If they really attacked, Green Fire Bandits would definitely suffer losses. If they could obtain a generous amount of gold coins without wasting a single soldier, anyone would know what to do as long as they weren't an idiot. Therefore, when he heard Han Shuo's tone, Fass thought for a moment before asking Han Shuo what his bottom line was. Mr. Fass, how about 1 gold coin? Han Shuo thought seriously from atop the city wall and asked Fass in a loud, serious voice. Waha! The soldiers guarding the city had been a bit nervous at first, but they couldn't help but burst into laughter when they heard Han Shuo's words. Even some of the citizens within Bretel City who'd heard the laughter had an amused smile on their faces. They thought that this new city lord had quite a sense of humor. You're King messing with me. Fass was enraged. He hadn't been this angry in a long time. The bandits under him all had ugly expressions on their faces. They wanted nothing more than to rush over and tear Han Shuo's group to pieces. Haha, so what if I messed with you? You'll get a gold coin today. Heh, maybe you'll even leave some for this city lord to use. You trash dared to rob me. You're clearly tired of living. I'll tell you the truth. I've already robbed all of Redbeard Trota's treasures. Add that to Helentina's 400,000 gold coins and my own gold coins. Bretel City now has far more than 1,000,000 gold coins. If you want to take it, you'll have to see if you have the ability. Stupid pig, come. Han Shuo laughed maniacally from atop the city walls. He pointed at Fass in the distance as if he was mocking an idiot. Fass was truly enraged. It had been many years since Fass had been looked down upon like this since he'd left Narsen Duchy. Looking at the incomparably arrogant young city lord on the opposite city wall, Fass had the urge to eat him alive. The bandits under him also felt the same way. Their faces were ashen as they charged towards Bretel City's city gates. Attack! Massacre the city for me! Fass roared furiously, giving the order to attack Bretel City in front of them. Massacre! Massacre the city! Jack's knees went soft, almost collapsing onto the ice-cold marble floor. When the citizens of Bretel City heard the two words, massacre the city, they'd previously relaxed because of Han Shua's humor. Now, they were instantly thrown into a bottomless abyss. Everyone's eyes were clouded with gray. They were at a loss as to how to respond. Although Bretel City had experienced the cruelty of war, it had never faced the bloody slaughter of an entire city. Otherwise, Bretel City would have long since become a city of the dead. They wouldn't have just been robbed of their belongings and food. They wouldn't have been able to preserve their lives. Unless one was a bloodthirsty demon or possessed boundless hatred, no one would easily give the order to massacre a city, regardless of whether it was a bandit raid or a war between two countries. This was because doing so would mean the destruction of all life in a city. This was a true bloodbath, not sparing even a chicken or a dog. Such a person would generally receive the condemnation of all countries. Those who dared to massacre a city would be despised and criticized by their own country. The party whose city had been massacred would spare no expense in retaliation. Although the 7 Grand Duchies were constantly at war, the act of massacring a city was extremely rare. Most people wouldn't dare do such a thing. Fass, the leader of the Green Fire Bandits, was no longer bound by any country's restrictions. Faced with Han Shua's arrogant provocation and insults, he couldn't hold back the rage in his heart any longer. Only by slaughtering all life in Bretel City would he be able to wash away the humiliation Han Shua had given him. "Humph, you think you're worthy?" Han Shua snorted coldly from atop the high wall. He turned his head and said to the soldiers beside him, "Bring out the chariots and catapults. I want to see how they die." After the order to massacre the city was given, the green flame flag of the Green Fire Bandits was smeared with a layer of fresh blood, turning it into a blood-red flame. The mages on the wooden frame were slowly pushed towards Bretel City. The 4 ballistae were also pushed forward, loaded with arrows. 2,000 furious bandits were already charging towards Han Shua with ladders, ropes, and iron hooks used to scale the walls. Chariots, ballistae, catapults, kerosene, boulders, and other necessary equipment for defending a city were pushed out from their hiding places under the busy hands of several hundred soldiers. They were divided into different directions and mounted on the wide city wall. However, the number of soldiers was just as small as the number of chariots and ballistae. There were only a few hundred soldiers on the city wall that could accommodate 7,000 to 8,000 people. It was indeed a bit sparse and shabby. Kill. The bandits had already charged over. They felt humiliated and had steeled their hearts to kill everyone in Bretel City. Their leader Fastface was ashen as he roared somewhat hysterically, "The first brother to reach the city wall will be rewarded with 1,000 gold coins." An enormous magical flame shot from Fast's hand into the sky. This was the signal that the 4 bandit groups had agreed upon beforehand. As the flaming signal shone brilliantly in the sky, the curtains of this siege officially began. The bandits, who'd fainted from the light and fragrance of the gold coins, charged forward with no fear of death, mixed with the rage in their hearts. Han Shua watched them calmly without a word. He waited until they were within firing range before giving the order to the soldiers, whose palms were already sweating from nervousness. Attack! Rumble, rumble, rumble. The roar of the war chariots resounded throughout the entire city, spewing out tongues of fire. The ballistae and crossbow bolts whizzed through the air, landing on the bandits together with the catapult's boulders. In an instant, an unbearable and tragic scene was created. The places that were sprayed by the war chariots exploded, and severed limbs and heads flew out amidst the billowing dust and blood. The bandits who'd been smashed into meat paste were all smashed into meat paste. The ballistae whizzed past, the powerful impact piercing through several bandits before stopping. Blood flowed like a river in front of Bretel City, and corpses littered the ground. Chapter 332. Under the onslaught of 2 war chariots, 5 ballistae, and 3 catapults, nearly 100 bandits were eternally trapped on the road. Fast, crazed roars rang out incessantly as smoke billowed on the battlefield. Mages, push the mages on the wooden towers over. Fire our ballistae. Hurry up. Following fast, deafening shouts, the bandits beneath the wooden towers pushed the towers towards Bretel City. The ballistae that the bandits had brought themselves were quickly pushed forward from the rear. Every ballista had several bandits wielding iron shields in front of it to clear the way. The war chariots were still spitting out tongues of flame, while the catapults shot high into the air, drawing a beautiful arc in the air. However, when they landed, an earth-shattering rumble rang out, followed by a spray of blood and severed limbs. 6 ballista bolts were like cold, life-reaping blades of light as they whizzed through the air, reaping the lives of the bandits. The road 500 meters in front of Bretel City had completely turned into hell on earth. The bandits that rushed over were bombarded by the fierce firepower on the city walls. There was absolutely no chance of survival if they were hit by the bullets. Scatter! Scatter! You damned idiots! How many times have I told you? Fast's shouts were somewhat hysterical, but unfortunately, the rumbling of the war chariots had drowned them out. The only bandits who could hear him were the row of bandits at the back. The Green Fire Bandits had a total of 6,000 people. Fast hadn't sent in all of his troops at once. The bandits that had rushed to Bretel City earlier weren't the true elites of the Green Fire Bandits. Fast had only had 1,000 or so trusted subordinates when he'd left Narsen Duchy. His numbers had slowly increased to their current size as he'd plundered more and more. The subordinates that had rushed to Bretel City earlier had all joined later. Fast wasn't very satisfied with their strength, and they were also the weakest among the Green Fire Bandits. This was the case in every siege. The first to be sent into battle were usually cannon fodder. In Fast's mind, these 2,000 subordinates were also cannon fodder. As long as they had enough gold coins, they wouldn't have to worry about not being able to recruit subordinates in this war-torn land of the 7 Grand Duchies. According to Fast calculations, these 2,000 people should be enough to take down Bretel City. What caused Fast to be taken aback was Bretel City's defensive capabilities. He'd originally thought that they'd be bombarded by magic crystal cannons, but he hadn't expected to see any. Instead, he discovered some other defensive equipment. These specialized defensive equipment were the most classic of tools. Once they were mounted on the city walls and fired from a high vantage point, all of them were life-reaping machines. Amidst the deafening explosions, the 2,000 bandits approached Bretel City step by step under the barrage of cannons and crossbow bolts. After paying the price of another 400 lives, a large number of bandits had already approached the city walls. There were even wooden ladders that had been erected amidst the heavy cannon fire. Hurry up, fill the crossbows with arrows, and fill the chariot with gunpowder. Han Shua's expression was indifferent, but his speech speed was extremely fast. He directed the soldiers beside him to fill the siege equipment as quickly as possible. These soldiers hadn't been exposed to chariots and ballistae for long. Under Fox's guidance, they'd trained day and night for a few days before grasping the use of chariots, ballistae, and catapults. However, they weren't skilled experts, especially on this bloody battlefield where the sounds of war were unceasing. The speed at which they operated the chariots was somewhat affected. Crack, 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 crack. A strange sound suddenly came from the side. Han Shua looked around in confusion, suddenly noticing that little Fatty Jack's lips were trembling. It was the sound of his teeth chattering. Little Fatty Jack stood beside Han Shua, gazing at the bloody battlefield in the distance. He looked at the mangled human heads that had been smashed into meat paste by boulders, the severed limbs that had been blown away by the chariots, and the bandits that had been sent flying by the impact of the crossbow bolts. Little Fatty Jack couldn't help but tremble slightly. Whoa, it's too scary. Little Fatty Jack's voice was a bit choked with sobs. His 2 small eyes were completely red as he trembled unconsciously. He'd sunk into a strange state of helplessness. Get ready, pour the kerosene. Han Shua glanced at Jack and didn't say anything when he saw that the latter was right beside him. Instead, he shouted to the soldiers around him. Before the battle had started, Han Shua already knew that little fatty Jack, who had never experienced such a scene before, would definitely be horrified by the cruelty of war. His expression of fear was within Han Shua's expectations, so Han Shua wasn't the least bit surprised. The demon's lair edge suddenly shot out from Han Shua's neck into the sky under the scorching sun. In a place where no one could see, the souls of the bandits were pulled into the demon's lair edge that was filled with unceasing ghastly wails, absorbing the soul energy bit by bit. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Finally, the bandits' ballistae were also released. Under the high-speed charge, the ballista bolts flew towards the city walls of Bretel City. More than 10 people were immediately killed by the soldiers who were frantically operating the war chariots and catapults, as well as the soldiers who had raised their bows and arrows to shoot down. No one on the wooden tower could do anything. When the demon's lair edge, powered by Han Shua's demonic art, bloody blade of 10,000 slashes, transformed into 10,000 streaks of bloody light, everyone on the wooden tower, the wooden frame, and the iron shields were all pulverized. In the blink of an eye, the bandit mage squad that Fast had spent a great deal of money to build became minced meat in a meat grinder. Blood splattered in all directions. The bloody blade of 10,000 slashes, which had been infused with 30% of the demonic yuan, didn't stop even after the wooden tower and the mages were pulverized. It was like an enormous, spinning, blood-red cactus that flew into the midst of the bandits, protecting the wooden tower. The bloody blade of 10,000 slashes, activated by the demon's lair edge, truly set off a rain of blood wherever it passed. Everything in its path, whether it was people, ballistae, or sturdy shields, was destroyed. Bewitching red blood rained down like a fine rain. After the demon's lair edge circled around, not a single one of the 100 bandits was left intact. There wasn't even a piece of flesh larger than an ear. The demon's lair edge, which could even crush iron shields, had also pulverized their bones. Damn it, where's the wooden tower? Where are the mages? Fast had focused all of his attention on Bretel City in the beginning and hadn't paid close attention to the changes on the wooden tower. When the bloody ball of light shot out, Fast suddenly noticed that the wooden tower he'd just erected had disappeared. He asked with some confusion, "Dead, they're all dead. That thing, it's all because of that thing." Next to Fast, a dutiful bandit pointed at the ball of blood that was still wantonly grinding everything in its path as he screamed. His scream was filled with intense fear. Amidst this scream that was mixed with fear, even more screams rang out at the same time. The bandits that were approached by the flying balls of blood all scrambled to avoid them, but every bandit that was touched by the balls of blood instantly turned into a rain of blood mixed with broken bones. Not a single one was lucky enough to escape. Attack that thing, attack it. Fast's heart was also filled with fear as he hastily roared at the bandits beside him. Dozens of sharp axes were suddenly flung out, shooting straight towards the demon's lair edge that was still spinning at high speed. Just as the sharp axes were about to reach the demon's lair edge that had been activated by the blood blade of 10,000 radiance, suddenly flew high into the sky due to the depletion of magical yuan. It was like a star of death that had unintentionally fallen, returning to the vast starry sky after completing its mission. What the hell is that thing? That damned necromancer. It must be an undead monster he created using necromancy magic. Everyone, don't be afraid. Continue to attack. Look, they can't hold on much longer. Humans were always more afraid of the unknown, and Fast was no exception. When he saw the speck of bloody light shoot into the sky and disappear, his tense heart suddenly relaxed. He then roared at the other terrified bandits as if to comfort himself. Just as Fast had said, although the demon's lair edge had disrupted the Magi's magical attacks, the bandits had too much of an advantage in terms of numbers. Using the wooden ladders and iron chains, they gradually began to climb up Bretel City's wide city walls. There were only 300 soldiers defending Bretel City. Over 20 of them had died in this short period of time, all of them killed by the ballistae below. The remaining 200 or so soldiers had already used up too much of their physical strength in the process of continuously moving boulders to fill the catapults and installing ballistae. 100 soldiers who'd been moving boulders were now completely exhausted, lying paralyzed on the ground, panting heavily. The soldiers who'd managed to pour kerosene onto the city walls were also panting heavily, looking like they didn't have much physical strength left. However, there were still 1,200 bandits left. 400 to 500 of them had already rushed to the bottom of the city walls, attempting to climb up Brettel City using wooden ladders and iron chains. "My lord, we really don't have enough manpower." A squad leader was on the verge of tears as he looked at the ferociously climbing bandits. What do we do? What do we do? Light the fire first. We won't lose as long as I'm alive." "What are you worried about?" Han Shua coldly snorted. Light the fire. Light the fire. Burn these bastards to death." The squad leader howled loudly. The soldiers, who'd been waiting for a long time, fiercely threw the burning torches in their hands into the oil-doused city walls. Boom! Raging fire instantly ignited the city walls that had been doused with kerosene. Some of the bandits who hadn't been able to retreat in time died miserably amidst the flames. There were also some bandits who'd quickly jumped down when the soldiers' torches were about to fall. The more experienced bandits at the bottom would even move the wooden ladders away from the city walls, slowly lowering the bandits who'd been lying on them. However, the soldiers who'd put down the torches immediately raised the bows in their hands, specifically aiming at these bandits. After a few volleys of arrows rained down, the dead bandits couldn't continue to take care of the wooden ladders and would often fall to their deaths. The kerosene reserves were limited, and Brettel City's city walls were too wide. There were still many places that couldn't be taken care of. A group of bandits was about to climb up the city walls through the wooden ladders. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Han Shua finally took out the skeletal staff and chanted a bone spear spell. The bandits who'd wanted to take advantage of the opportunity to climb up the city walls were all sent flying by the bone spears. Dozens of them were instantly pierced to death. The bandits below the city walls also raised their crossbows and shot upwards. Once the 300 to 400 bandits stabilized their shooting, the Brettel City soldiers who'd peeked their heads out didn't have it easy either. Several careless ones were shot to death. This was only because Han Shua had taken action to defend himself. Otherwise, there would have been even more casualties. "My lord, isn't it time?" Another squad leader had seen Han Shua summon the undead army with his own eyes last time. His expression could still be considered calm, but now that his comrades were gradually losing ground, he finally spoke to Han Shua. At this time, the Greenfire Mercenary Corps was still using the 2,000 bandits that had rushed over at the beginning. However, due to the kerosene burning, another portion of them had died. In addition to the dozens of soldiers who still had strength left to continue shooting arrows from the chariots, another 200 bandits who hadn't reached the city walls had died. Now, only 800 of the 2,000 bandits were left. 600 of them had made it to the city walls. The goblin gunpowder for the chariots on the city walls had already been used up, and there were only 100 or so crossbow arrows left. The boulders that had taken a great deal of effort to carry up had long since been used up. There were less than 50 soldiers in Brettel City who could still stand. If Han Shua didn't make a move now, it was likely that Brettel City's city gates would really be breached. Therefore, looking at the excited and crazed bandits who'd finally made it to the city walls, Han Shua nodded and calmly said, "It is indeed time." Licking his lips, the leader of the Green Fire Bandits, Fass, looked at the exhausted Brettel City defenses in front of him and laughed cruelly. "Young city lord, you will pay a painful price for your arrogance. I will skin you alive, pull out your bones, and torture you until you wish you were dead." "Leader, he's also a necromancer. You have to be careful." A bandit next to him suddenly remembered the rumors about Han Shua and hastily reminded Fass. "Haha, a necromancer. A necromancer who can only summon useless skeletons. What use can he have in a battle like this?" Fass turned his head and said to the bandit, "Add another 1,000 men and charge over. Let's take down Brettel City in one go." Under Fass' orders, the bandit leader waved his large hand and said, "Tuku, you guys charge over and flatten this damned Brettel City." As the leader of a 1,000-man brigade, Tuku used to be Fass' personal bodyguard. This 1,000-man brigade wasn't like the 2,000 people who just charged forward as cannon fodder. The 1,000-man bandit brigade led by Tuku had sharper and sturdier weapons. In addition, 500 of them rode valiant warhorses. The warhorses were also protected by armor. They were clearly a regular night squad. With a flick of Tuku's spear, the 1,000-strong bandit squad charged towards the corpses strewn all over Bretel City. Among them were 500 bandit knights on valiant warhorses, quickly arriving at the base of the city walls like the wind. The exhausted Bretel City soldiers only managed to shoot a few dozen scattered arrows in the process, completely unable to cause any damage to these fully armored knights and warhorses. Heh, they really can't hold on any longer. I knew it. Fast sneered in a low voice, as if he could already see the dawn of victory. He'd even started thinking about how to slowly torture Han Shuo after capturing him. Where's the sun? Where's the sun? The bandit knights had just reached the city walls when they suddenly felt the sky darken. It was just past noon, still a long way from nightfall. How could the sky have darkened so quickly? They raised their heads to look at the sky. Green-black clouds had floated over from who knew where, covering the previously clear sky. Not a single ray of sunlight was able to penetrate the dark clouds and land on the battlefield. The appearance of these dark clouds was strange, giving the bandits an ominous premonition. Don't make a fuss about nothing. The weather here is just like this. It looks like it's going to rain soon. If it rains, the kerosene will lose its effect. We're practically blessed by the gods. We can take advantage of this opportunity to kill them all. Captain Tuku carelessly comforted his subordinates. He pointed at the first group of bandits frantically climbing the city walls and shouted, "Hurry up! Kill all those cowardly soldiers! You talk too much nonsense." Han Shuo had finally finished his lengthy incantation. He waved the skeletal staff in his hand, sending out a faint gray mist. This gray mist carried a thick aura of death as it slowly drifted towards Bretel City. There was a desolate and gloomy smell in the air. The gray mist floated in spirals, gradually spreading towards the center of the corpses strewn all over the battlefield. Several crows that smelled the scent of corpses were blown away by the gray mist. They all flapped their wings and flew far away, as if there was something terrifying within the gray mist. This damned weather, not only are there dark clouds, but there's also a gray mist. It looks like it's really going to rain. Hurry up, hurry up. There's one up there. Tuku raised his head to look at the city walls and shouted in pleasant surprise, as if trying to motivate even more bandits. With a crunching sound, the bandit that had finally managed to rush up had his neck snapped by Han Shuo. He tossed his body down to the bandits below like he was throwing trash. Boom! The corpse of the bandit who had been the first to climb up the city wall and had his neck snapped made a loud noise when he landed among the bandits, scaring the bandits who had been about to recklessly charge forward. Suddenly, an even more frightening thing happened right before their eyes. The fingers of the bandit, whose neck had been snapped, twitched when the gray mist blew at him. Then, the bandit whose head had been twisted to his back actually slowly stood up. His lifeless eyes were now a deathly pale gray. His movements were a bit stiff as he casually stabbed a living bandit to death with the dagger in his hand. The surrounding bandits suddenly screamed as if they'd seen a ghost in broad daylight. These bandits were scared out of their wits when they saw this illogical turn of events. Fear caused them to instinctively retreat. At the same time, more screams erupted from the mouths of the bandits like a contagious disease. Seeing their dead brothers stand up again with their lifeless, grayish-white eyes, brandishing their weapons and charging at them mercilessly, the bandits screamed in horror. This is the legendary lost necromancy magic, corpse resurrection. Heavens, this damned evil necromancer. How could he have mastered it? Fast of the Green Fire Bandits had actually heard of this ancient legend. When he saw the corpses stand up again, his scalp went numb as he cried out in alarm. More and more corpses stood up as Fast cried out in alarm. Based on their last bit of reluctance to part ways with their lives, they began to mercilessly attack anyone who was still alive. They would never know if the person they were attacking was their close comrade who had been drinking, chatting, and visiting prostitutes with them last night. The panic caused by the corpse resurrection instantly spread among the bandits besieging the city. At this moment, the terrified bandits had no intention of continuing to attack the city. Their only thought was to leave this evil place as soon as possible. Some bandits whose hands were stained with blood actually started to chant the Church of Light's holy hymns, as if they thought this would purify the dark energy around them. Unfortunately, the God of Light would never extend an olive branch to these fellows who had no faith. When a zombie used its weapon to stab through the body of a chanting bandit, all the other bandits who were still chanting immediately stopped their meaningless actions and turned tail to run. Trying to run? It won't be that easy. Han Shuo, who was grinning maliciously from atop the city wall, looked like a demon that had descended upon the earth. He floated in the air and waved the skeletal staff in his hand, creating acidic swamps that filled the path between Fass and the bandits. Shoot him to death. Shoot him to death for me. Fass suppressed the fear in his heart as he pointed at Han Shuo and roared crazily. He also took out a priceless giant crossbow, aimed at Han Shuo, and fired an arrow. Poor Fass. I told you. So what if I tricked you? Look at how many gold coins you left me. Haha, the ground is covered in armor and weapons. Who knows, there might even be some gold coins on those bandits who died. Tell me, how should I thank you? Han Shuo was all smiles as he looked at Fass. He raised his empty right hand, and a ball of gorgeous red light fell into his palm from the heavens. Another bloody radiance of 10,000 cuts was slowly taking shape. Chapter 333. Dozens of arrows whistled through the air, shooting towards Han Shuo like rain. However, before these arrows could even reach him, the deadly red light that had been brewing in Han Shuo's hand once again flew out. Another 30% of his magical yuan was infused into the Demon's Lair Edge. Having absorbed 30% of the magical yuan, the Demon's Lair Edge emitted endless howls of resentment. The fresh souls that the Demon's Lair Edge had just absorbed still carried a trace of longing for life. They emitted an unreconciled resentment that soared to the heavens. However, the souls of the bandits that had been tightly bound by the Demon's Lair Edge had no way of escaping the eternal imprisonment of the Demon's Lair Edge. Their hatred and resentment actually increased the power of the bloody radiance of 10,000 slashes. A dazzling firework-like ball of light blossomed with beautiful purple and red. The Demon's Lair Edge that had flown out of Han Shuo's hand once again danced in the air like a blazing sun full of barbs. All the arrows hadn't even gotten close to Han Shuo before they were pulverized by the Demon's Lair Edge powered by the bloody radiance of 10,000 slashes. The Demon's Lair Edge's power hadn't weakened in the slightest. It carried boundless resentment and killing intent as it streaked across the sky in a beautiful, dazzling arc, heading straight for Fass and the others. Not good, leader. Retreat. The bandit next to Fass was greatly shocked. He cried out in fear and turned around on his warhorse like a stray dog. Seeing his subordinate flee in a panic, Fass, who had originally planned on scolding him, suddenly recalled the cruel scene of the bloody light. He couldn't help but shiver. He didn't dare to pretend to be a hero and stayed behind. He reined in his warhorse and ran like the bandit. The dazzling bloody light swirled and descended like a murderous spirit, pulverizing everyone it came into contact with. First, 5 or 6 bandit chieftains were smashed to pieces. Under Han Shuo's control, the Demon's Lair Edge howled and churned through the air with a soaring killing intent. It chased after Fass and the others without losing any of its power. The corpses below Brettel City resurrected one after the other. Under the cover of the canopy of necromancy, these corpses blankly attacked all living beings in the surroundings. The sight of the corpses with their intestines still hanging out and their bodies dripping with blood holding weapons obviously provoked the bandits who should have been charging towards Brettel City without a care for their own safety. In the face of fear, the most instinctive action for humans was to run as far away as possible. These bandits made full use of this advantage. Tuka's group of elites on warhorses ran away much faster than when they charged over. There were even some who'd rushed out like lightning before Han Shua's acid swamp had even taken shape. Who knew where their potential came from? Of course, even more bandits were intercepted by the acid swamp. The swamp was suffused with the aura of death and the smell of corrosion. After a dozen or so bandits had carelessly walked into the acid swamp without a care for their own safety and were dissolved into a dozen skeletons, the remaining bandits who hadn't yet escaped suddenly became well-behaved. In front of them was the acid swamp that could instantly kill them. Behind them were the corpses that were closing in on them. The bandits, who were surrounded by danger on both sides, were bitterly weighing which side was safer out of extreme yearning for life. After a while, their desire for life overcame their fear of corpses. Unable to soar through the air like Han Shua, they forcefully suppressed the fear in their hearts and gripped the weapons in their hands, aiming at the approaching corpses. These corpses that had died not too long ago might have been their best friends, but the bandits knew what to do under the threat of death. Kill. One of the bandits let out a low roar, and the remaining bandits no longer hesitated. They pointed their sharp weapons at their recently deceased comrades, killing them for the sake of their own lives. They cut off the heads of the corpses that had been whole, leaving their dead comrades without a complete corpse. The true battle strength of the resurrected corpses wasn't particularly ferocious. Usually, they didn't even have half of their strength when they were alive. They weren't even as agile as the zombie warriors summoned from another world. These corpses often brought fear in people's hearts. Once the bandits overcame the fear in their hearts and truly attacked these corpses, they discovered that their movements were slow and sluggish. Their strength was also affected. Although they didn't fear pain, as long as their heads and hearts were completely destroyed, the corpses wouldn't be able to stand up again. The bandits quickly discovered the weakness of the corpses. When they destroyed a few corpses and discovered that they weren't that scary, the fear in their hearts gradually subsided. They began to work together in an orderly manner to destroy the corpses that were still standing. Compared to the acid bog that sealed off their path of retreat, these corpses didn't seem as frightening. As long as they didn't think about the fact that these people were once their friends, the bandits would be able to quickly and efficiently eliminate the corpses that were still standing. The bandits, who were not kind to begin with, were obviously more cruel and unscrupulous. They comforted themselves by saying that the people in front of them were already dead, and without hesitation, they waved the sharp weapons in their hands and beheaded the corpses of their former comrades. Han Shua stood proudly in the air, controlling the demon's lair edge in a practiced manner as it chased after Fass. He lowered his head to look at the bandits who were slowly getting used to it. He let out a soft "eh" and murmured, "I've underestimated their viciousness. No wonder they were once bandits." Ordinary soldiers wouldn't disregard the lives of their former comrades as much as they do. After muttering to himself in a low voice, Han Shua thought for a moment. He grinned cruelly and said, "It looks like it's time to add another fierce dose." Just as Han Shua was about to use the skeletal staff to summon the true undead army with his remaining mental strength, he suddenly heard an earth-shattering rumble. The entire Bretel city seemed to be trembling from this enormous rumble. The direction of the sound came from behind Han Shua. Han Shua was stunned for a moment before he exclaimed softly, "They've finally activated the magic crystal cannons." Taking a deep breath, Han Shua was about to chant another long and tedious incantation when a group of white figures suddenly appeared in his line of sight. A group of 100 people was slowly approaching from the direction that Fass and the others had fled. Kas, who'd fought against Han Shua last time, was walking over together with the Temple Knights of the Church of Light, as well as a few white priests. Han Shua was startled. The demon's lair edge that had been chasing after Fass suddenly changed directions and shot towards Kas and the others. The demon's lair edge surged forward, radiating bloody light in all directions. Its target was Kas, who was surrounded by the Temple Knights. Kas, who possessed the Church of Light's divine weapon, Revelation, would be able to play an extremely important role in this situation. He could even reverse the situation. When the holy light of Revelation sprinkled down, not only would the corpses be completely purified, even if Han Shua summoned the undead army, it would be of no use. In a large-scale battle like this, Bretel City's defenses were completely supported by Han Shua's undead army. Once they lost this support, Bretel City would truly be doomed. Therefore, when he saw Kas appear in the distance, Han Shua immediately hardened his heart and decided to eliminate this person at all costs. Otherwise, if he allowed Kas to open Revelation and chant the blessing of the Holy Light, it would be harder than ascending to the heavens for Han Shua to win this battle. Under the activation of the bloody radiance of 10,000 slashes, the demon's lair edge spun at high speed, shooting bloody light that reaped lives. Its killing intent soared to the heavens as it smashed towards Kas. The few lower-ranked temple knights at the front hadn't even had the time to take out their weapons when they were smashed by the huge, hedgehog-like ball of light. The demon's lair edge, which was like millions of sharp weapons flying together, once again displayed its bloody, pulverizing power as soon as it landed among the lower-ranked temple knights. Crunching sounds rang out as the armor of the temple knights was shattered first, followed by the flesh beneath the armor. However, the armor of the temple knights was obviously many times stronger than that of the bandits. When the demon's lair edge had crushed the bandits' armor, there hadn't been the slightest sound, as if it was as easy as crushing their flesh. However, the armor of these temple knights of the Church of Light must have been forged with a special method by an alchemist, and even possessed a portion of magic resistance. When the demon's lair edge's bloody radiance of 10,000 slashes sliced down, although the temple knights had also turned into a rain of blood along with the bandits, it had taken Han Shua 5 times the time. It was precisely because he had spent 5 times the time that the 6 high-ranked temple knights with crosses on their chests that they had the time to form a hexagonal star formation, quickly surrounding the still-spinning demon's lair edge in the center. The 6 long swords that had been blessed and soaked in holy water simultaneously burst forth with a pure and holy light, shooting at the demon's lair edge that was still shooting out thousands of bloody lights. A wave of extremely pleasing tinkling sounds accompanied by flying sparks continuously rang out. The long swords soaked in holy water had a certain degree of purification effect. The portion of the vengeful spirits that the demon's lair edge had just absorbed that hadn't completely fused with was actually released into the world. The other energies of the holy light hindered the demon's lair edge's continued rotation. It looked like the sword formation formed by the 6 high-ranked temple knights did indeed have some miraculous effects. The demon's lair edge's rotation speed became slower and slower as its magical yuan was gradually depleted. Finally, under the control of Han Shua's consciousness, it once again flew out of the sword formation and into the sky. After the demon's lair edge flew into the sky, the 6 high-ranked temple knights with crosses on their chests were also panting a bit, looking at the demon's lair edge that had already disappeared with lingering fear. It was as if they were afraid that the demon's lair edge would return once again. Red Archbishop Kas looked at the changes in front of him with trepidation, repeatedly praying with the Book of Revelation in his hands. Only when he discovered that the demon's lair edge had truly disappeared did he look at Han Shua and say, "Heretic, your sins are no longer enough to be forgiven. The burning of the holy fire will be your only end." Kas, who had bitterly tried to persuade Han Shua last time, no longer had any patience with Han Shua now. In Kas's eyes, Han Shua was now a demon through and through, a sinner even more evil than the Calamity Church. He had to be eliminated at all costs in order to save more people from his evil. "I'm actually looking forward to the burning of your holy fire, but I'm afraid you won't have the chance." Han Shua snorted disdainfully. His right hand suddenly burst into raging flames, enveloping Han Shua's entire right hand. Han Shua looked at the raging flames burning on his right hand, then stared coldly at Kas and said, "Is the color of your holy fire like this? Heretic who blasphemes the holy fire, you will be judged by the God of Light." Kas shouted loudly and started chanting a hymn under the heavy protection of the 6 temple knights. The divine weapon of the Church of Light in his hand, Revelation, moved on its own amidst his melodious hymn, quickly flipping its pages. Circles of light carrying a holy aura spread into the surroundings, rapidly turning the corpses that Han Shuo had resurrected into ashes under the illumination of the holy light. Even the dark green canopy of necromancy that enveloped the entire sky was torn apart by rays of dazzling golden light. Even the acid bogs were evaporated by the holy light. In almost an instant, the kingdom of death that Han Shuo had expended an enormous amount of mental strength to construct actually shattered under the envelopment of the holy light. It wasn't wrong to say that the Church of Light was necromancer's natural enemy. Han Shuo naturally wouldn't pay any attention to low-level light mages, but Kas, who possessed the divine weapon revelation, was indeed a great threat to Han Shuo when he used the power of the divine weapon. Han Shuo, who'd originally had victory in his grasp, had been disrupted by Kas's appearance. If he couldn't use his undead creatures to resist them, it would be as difficult as ascending to the heavens for Han Shuo to defend Brettel City by himself. "I hate this kind of light," Han Shuo said in disgust as he looked at the spreading circles of holy light. However, his mind was rapidly thinking of a way to deal with it. This was because, due to Kas's appearance, Han Shuo suddenly discovered that the bandit leader Fas, who'd originally fled without a care for anything, had actually returned with his subordinates. Under the purification of the holy light, the several hundred bandits below Brettel City had lost the double threat of the acid bogs and corpses. They once again started eyeing the sparse soldiers on the city walls. Chapter 334. As matters stood, he could only summon the Fire Elite Zombie, Wood Elite Zombie, Earth Elite Zombie, and Little Skull at the same time. Otherwise, if Han Shuo wanted to resist the attacks of the bandits and the Church of Light's Kas's group by himself, he would have no chance of winning. Kas was heavily surrounded by the 6 Templar Knights, holding Revelation in his hands and still chanting hymns. Halos of holy light slowly drifted out from the Revelation, purifying the kingdom of death that Han Shuo had painstakingly created. Han Shuo didn't continue to hover in the air to kill Kas. Instead, he slowly floated backwards. With a wave of his hand, Han Shuo threw out the blood seether. As soon as the blood seether flew out of Han Shuo's hand, it immediately emitted a thick, bloody mist. This demonic treasure that Han Shuo had meticulously refined didn't contain any aura of death. Naturally, it wouldn't fear the purification of the holy light. The bloody mist of the blood seether spread out. The bandits that were enveloped by it all began to wail miserably. The blood seether could stimulate the blood in their bodies, causing it to rapidly flow through their bodies, causing them to explode one by one. When the blood rampaged through their bodies would explode when they couldn't bear the burden. Wherever the bloody mist passed, the bandits would beat their chests and stomp their feet, howling in pain. However, they couldn't stop the rapid flow of blood within their bodies. The crisp popping sounds indicated that their bones had been broken by the blood. Then, before they could react, the broken bones pierced through their soft skin, causing even more blood to gush out. One by one, the bandits enveloped in the bloody mist exploded and died. During this process, Han Shuo brandished the skeletal staff in his left hand and also had the time to summon the Little Skull, Earth Elite Zombie, Wood Elite Zombie, and Fire Elite Zombie. Under the cover of the bloody mist from the blood seether, the Earth Elite Zombie was the first to burrow into the ground, stealthily heading in Kas's direction. The little skeleton carried the Wood Elite Zombie and flew into the sky, landing directly on the city walls of Brettel City. Under Han Shuo's orders, the little skeleton and the Wood Elite Zombie were responsible for the safety of Brettel City. Once bandits rushed up the city walls, the little skeleton and the Wood Elite Zombie would be responsible for killing them. The Fire Lotus imprint on the big-headed Fire Elite Zombie's forehead became more and more obvious. As soon as he flashed out from the other dimension, pillars of fire shot out from his body. The Fire Lotus on his forehead was like a raging flame. As it rapidly throbbed, Fire Lotuses gradually grew larger and larger. The Fire Lotus was a treasure of the fire attribute. The Fire Elite Zombie gradually grasped how to use it after obtaining it. The lotus flames that floated out from the Fire Lotus were only the size of a fingernail at first. However, this was obviously not the true form of the Fire Lotus. The fire lotus swayed in the wind, the blazing flames gradually growing larger until each of them was the size of a large bowl. The fire elite zombie's entire body was covered in raging flames. Lotus flames floated out from the mark on his forehead, gradually growing larger and larger until they were the size of large bowls. They flew towards the bandits in the surroundings, and any bandit that came into contact with a spark was instantly set ablaze. The fierceness and terror of this kind of flame exceeded their imaginations. Even if they quickly poured water from their water bags, they still couldn't extinguish the spark. A fingertip-sized spark would ignite anything it touched. Skin, clothes, even armor and weapons seemed to be able to fuel the ferocity of the flame. In the span of a few breaths, those bandits that came into contact with the spark all screamed miserably and became flaming men. Before they could cry out in pain from being burned, an unpleasant burnt smell wafted from their bodies. The flaming men turned black, the living turned into the dead. This process was so short. Under the extremely painful and bewitching flames, dozens of bandits near the fire elite zombie turned into charcoal and collapsed. On the other side, the earth elite zombie, who was deep underground, took advantage of the chaos above his head and slowly snuck into the ground by relying on his remarkable ability as a darling of the earth. He quickly ran towards Kas and the others. As a red-robed archbishop of the Church of Light, while Kas was extremely against heretics, he did indeed possess a bit of impartiality and compassion. He watched as bandits were burned into black chunks of flesh in front of him. Chanting a hymn, Kas shouted to the temple knights around him, "Save them!" Han Shuo continued to use the Bloodseether to reap lives while focusing his attention on Kas. Seeing the temple knights slowly approaching while protecting Kas, Han Shuo immediately gave the Earth Elite Zombie the order to launch a surprise attack. Violent tremors accompanied by muffled sounds came from the depths of the earth. Earth spikes abruptly rose from the ground, piercing towards the Church of Light who had their attention focused on the front. Caught off guard, the Temple Knights and White Priests of the Church of Light were stabbed to death in an instant. The earth spikes pierced through the feet of those knights precisely. As a result, those well-armored knights fell off their war horses while howling miserably. The earth spikes pierced through the soles of those knights precisely. As a result, those knights fell off their war horses while howling miserably. The White Priests who purified the souls on the battlefield were the targets of Han Shuo's deep hatred. Their purification of the souls of the dead caused the Demon's Lair Edge to be unable to obtain enough soul energy. It could even be said that it indirectly prevented the Demon's Lair Edge from evolving further. Up until now, the Demon's Lair Edge had yet to truly possess a primary soul. The Demon's Lair Edge would only be able to evolve into a primary soul after absorbing enough soul energy. Only then would the Demon's Lair Edge truly become a peerless weapon in the truest sense. Coming to Brett El City this time, the continuous large-scale battles had allowed Han Shuo to be like a fish in water. The soul energy of the dead was devoured by Han Shuo's Demon's Lair Edge, rapidly accelerating the Demon's Lair Edge's growth. Han Shuo even felt that the Demon's Lair Edge wasn't far from its final form. He couldn't allow it to be destroyed by these hateful priests of the Church of Light. Therefore, when Kas and the others approached, Han Shuo gave the Earth Elite Zombie the order to kill the white-clothed priests first. The white priests who didn't need to fight in close combat naturally didn't wear armor. Under the attacks of the earth spikes, every one of the white priests, apart from Kas who was firmly protected by the Temple Knights, couldn't escape from Han Shuo's murderous hands. Demon. We must eliminate this demon. Kas trembled as he tightly grasped Revelation in front of his chest. Seeing the white priests who didn't receive the same treatment as him being stabbed to death, he angrily yelled at Han Shuo in the distance. You brought this upon yourselves. I've never provoked your Church of Light. It was you who chased me to death and refused to let go. Humph, from now on, I will kill any Church of Light disciple who dares to offend us. I don't believe I can't kill all of you. Han Shuo arrogantly floated in the air, coldly yelling as he looked at the trembling Kas in the distance. Shoot him to death. Hatchets, pikes, javelins, hurry. The bandit leader, Fas, roared loudly with extreme heartache as he watched his subordinates drown in the sea of fire. The remaining two ballistae aimed at the fire elite zombie in the middle of the sea of fire. All kinds of sharp weapons flew towards the fire elite zombie in the middle of the sea of fire. The fire elite zombie wantonly controlled the lotus flames within the sea of fire, causing the lotus armor on his body to ring out. The various ballistae that flew towards his body had yet to truly land on his body when the sharp arrows and sharp blades were burned by the raging flames. When they finally landed on his body, not only was their power greatly reduced, but they also couldn't display their penetrative power after the metal melted. In addition, the fire elite zombie would naturally reconstruct his body after being formed, and the reconstructed body was sufficiently sturdy, so he didn't suffer much damage. However, even the 5 ultimate elite zombies that were nurtured in the 5 extreme places of heaven and earth didn't have limitless energy within their bodies, just like how there was no absolute eternal power in everything. After 20 to 30 lotus flames floated on the fire elite zombie's forehead, the fire elite zombie finally showed signs of fatigue and sent a signal to Han Shuo. Han Shuo could clearly sense the fire elite zombie's thoughts. The fire elite zombie, who had yet to fully mature, had released such a large amount of energy all at once. Naturally, he would be somewhat exhausted. Sparks flew everywhere the 20 to 30 lotus flames passed. None of the bandits that came into contact with them were lucky enough to be burnt to death. In just a short period of time, more than 300 charred corpses were left on the ground forever. This was the result of the fire elite zombie not having fully grasped the power of the fire lotus. Once the fire elite zombie slowly matured and became more adept at controlling the fire lotus, the destructive power he would be able to cause would be even more terrifying. In addition, when the 5 ultimate elite zombies were first refined, each of them would naturally possess a set of cultivation methods. In other words, the 5 ultimate elite zombies that had just been born were actually in their weakest form. Once they slowly evolved using the cultivation method, their strength would slowly grow stronger with the passage of time. Their use of their innate abilities would also become more and more terrifying. Han Shuo had no doubt that when the 5 ultimate elite zombies evolved to the end, they would possess the mystical power to destroy heaven and earth. Not to mention that the 5 ultimate elite zombies could also form a large formation. Now that the water elite zombie was also in the process of being nurtured, along with the metal elite zombie that was the most difficult to appear, Han Shuo would be able to practice the large formation. Having used up all of his energy in one go, the fire elite zombie was already showing signs of fatigue. With a wave of Han Shuo's skeletal staff, the fire elite zombie disappeared into the other dimension amidst the raging flames. After the fire elite zombie left this plane of existence, the 20 to 30 lotus flames that had lost their source of energy gradually dispersed into the sky after claiming the lives of another 50 bandits. The bandits that had been dodging the lotus flames in all directions, wailing like ghosts and howling like wolves, all breathed a sigh of relief when they saw the deadly lotus flames disappear one after another. They silently cursed their leader in their hearts. What did he mean by there wasn't too much danger? Brettel City, which hadn't had any city defenses in the past, was simply an incomparably terrifying demon castle. All sorts of strange and bizarre things could be found here. By now, more than half of the 6,000 bandits that Fass, the leader of the Green Fire Bandits, had brought with him, had died. More than 3,200 people had mysteriously died in this siege, including more than 1,000 true elites. Fass wanted to cry as he looked at the corpses strewn all over the ground. Brettel City was like a demon city bearing its sinister fangs. It was like a tireless machine that harvested lives, constantly displaying its ruthlessness and cruelty. The elites that had managed to reach the top of Brettel City's city walls with great difficulty were all sent flying down from the high walls under the attacks of the other 2 strange, undead creatures. Practically all of them were dead before they even hit the ground. This was the work of Little Skull and the Wood Elite Zombie. The bandit leader Fass had thought that the appearance of the Red Archbishop of the Church of Light, the natural enemy of necromancers, would allow them to easily break through Brettel City's defenses. However, when he saw Little Skull and the Wood Elite Zombie jumping about under the illumination of the holy light, easily killing his subordinates that had climbed up the city walls with great difficulty. He cursed Kasa's 18 generations of ancestors in his heart. What nightmare of a necromancer's natural enemy! What emissary of the continent of light! It's all King bullshit. The Red Archbishop with the divine weapon Revelation in his hand couldn't even purify a tiny skeleton and a few zombies. He's King done us in. Fast cursed incessantly in his heart as he watched the bandits explode one by one inside Han Shua's bloodseether. Then, he looked at Kas and the others from the Church of Light, who were in a complete mess and couldn't even fend for themselves. Fast rapidly thought of a countermeasure. By now, Fast could see that Bretel City was relying solely on Han Shua's support. If he were to retreat with his tail between his legs after losing so many of his brothers, the reputation of his Green Fire Bandit band would definitely plummet once word of this got out. But if they didn't leave now, who knew how many more unimaginable methods that terrifying city lord of Bretel City would have? In the depths of Fast's heart, he was truly afraid of Han Shua. He secretly cursed the guy who'd leaked the information and instigated him to come over 100 times. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Bolts of crossbow bolts shot out from the ballistae. Tongues of flame shot out from the war chariots and landed on the temple knights of the Church of Light, instantly causing 3 temple knights to be blown away along with their warhorses. After resting for a long time, the exhausted soldiers on Bretel City's walls finally recovered their strength. They once again controlled the sharp weapons beside them to spit out dazzling tongues of flame. Motherf *Ker. Retreat. All of you, retreat. Fast no longer hesitated when he saw the flames from the war chariots soar into the sky. Although 1,000,000 gold coins was tempting, he might not be able to obtain it in the current situation. The war chariots moving again meant that the soldiers on the city walls had regained their fighting strength. Thinking back to the terrifying destructive power of the war chariots, ballistae, and catapults, then looking at his subordinates, Fast painfully gave the order to retreat. The bandits had long since been scared witless and had only been waiting for Fast's order. When they heard the heavenly order to retreat, the bandits no longer dared to stay. They followed behind Fast and fled into the distance. Useless Church of Light, what kind of emissaries of God of Light are you? You can't even purify a few dark creatures. I really feel ashamed for you, Tui. When Fast passed by Kas and the others, he stopped his warhorse and glared at Kas, who was in the middle of the temple knights, with a look of disdain and anger. He spat on the ground to vent his anger before leaving. In the beginning, Fast had been toyed with by Han Shua. When the people of the Church of Light had suddenly appeared and purified the corpses under the illumination of the holy light, Fast had thought that he had seen the dawn of victory. Who would have thought that the holy light wasn't purified enough? The few undead creatures that had reappeared had actually caused such great damage to them. Fast felt that he had been played by Kas again. One could imagine the sullen feeling in his heart. If Fast hadn't known of the Church of Light's influence on the continent, if he hadn't known that the Temple Knights were one of the trump cards of the Church of Light, the savage Fast would have mercilessly led his subordinates to tear these useless followers of the Church of Light to pieces. Shoot! Shoot those people in white! Han Shua, who was floating in the air, put away the blood seeker, which had been reduced to a bloody cloth, and shouted at the soldiers on the city wall. The soldiers, who had recovered their strength, obeyed Han Shua's orders and aimed their war chariots and ballistae at the Church of Light. The remaining firepower violently fired at the Church of Light, causing the temple knights of the Church of Light to be thrown off their feet. Even Kas was almost hit by a goblin bomb. Cardinal, what do you think of the situation? A temple knight with the pattern of a cross on his chest was protecting Kas with all his might as he asked hesitantly. Red Archbishop Kas, who had just been insulted by the departing Fast, had an ugly expression on his face. He awkwardly dodged a goblin bomb, then closed his eyes and said in a low voice, "Another failure. It looks like I'll have to see the Pope myself. Let's go. Leave this place immediately." As soon as Kas gave his order, the temple knight waved the sword in his hand and pointed behind him. The temple knights who had suddenly arrived this time dragged the 37 corpses onto their warhorses and gradually rode away from the smoky battlefield. not leaving behind any belongings of the dead. They're gone. They've all retreated. A soldier who had lost all his strength looked at the gradually disappearing enemies and revealed a somewhat ugly but sincere smile. The soldiers who could still stand looked at Han Shuo, who stood proudly in the air like a demon god. They felt that as long as Han Shuo was present, Bretel City would never be breached by anyone again. Han Shuo had used the Een demons to watch the departing enemies from afar. He knew that they had truly retreated. Looking at the corpses strewn all over the ground in front of Bretel City that was riddled with holes, Han Shuo shouted, "Soldiers who still have strength, guard this place well. Don't relax for even a moment." These people were truly exhausted. Han Shuo could still hear deafening explosions coming from the direction of the other two city gates. He understood that the battles on at least two sides hadn't ended yet. However, the soldiers on this most desperate of battlefields had long since lost the strength to rush to either side. Han Shuo also understood that they had used every ounce of strength they had, so he decided to head there himself. The citizens of Bretel City were on tenterhooks when they heard the weak cheers from the soldiers on Han Shuo's side. They were afraid that they would be implicated in the massacre of the city, so they paid close attention to any changes in that direction. There were even a few brave citizens who rushed to the top of the city walls and witnessed the entire battle. Therefore, as soon as the temple knights, Fas, and the others had retreated, the citizens in this area started cheering. The citizens, whose hearts had been filled with fear, were now filled with a strong sense of happiness and excitement. Being able to keep their lives from being implicated in the massacre of the city made them feel very happy. For so many years, the city lords of Bretel City had always been one step ahead of them. But after Han Shuo's arrival, they had finally subverted their understanding. He'd practically single-handedly turned the tide, firmly defending the enormous Bretel City with his miraculous powers. Although victory had come with great difficulty and was full of twists and turns, the fruit of victory was incomparably sweet. They had always been struggling at death's door, but now they felt incomparable excitement at this moment of victory because they were the witnesses of this moment. As the citizens on Han Shuo's side cheered, the citizens on the other three sides also gradually revealed smiling faces. Apart from the soldiers at the city gate that Fok was guarding, there were even citizens who took the initiative to join in the fight against the enemy. These citizens, who didn't know how to use the defensive equipment, worked together to move huge stones and place them on the catapults. They watched as the stones they'd placed on the catapults fell into the bandit group and caused terrifying destruction. When the stones that Fok's side had originally prepared were used up, the citizens volunteered to move the stone tables and chairs from the nearest houses and use them as defensive stones to hurl them out, dealing an unforgettable blow to the invaders. The city gate that Dick, Chester, and Fabian were guarding was facing the flying dragon bandits. This city gate had 2 magic crystal cannons, 4 war chariots, 7 ballistae, 6 catapults, and 1,000 elite soldiers. Dick and the other 2 didn't have any experience in commanding an army, so Fok had arranged for an officer who was good at defending the city. It was precisely because they were worried that their side wouldn't be able to handle the heavy burden that Han Shuo and the others had placed more firepower on this side. The leader of the Flying Dragon Bandits, Afai, was a sinister, scheming, and vicious villain. He'd had other thoughts from the start. When fast signals soared into the sky, Afai didn't immediately launch an attack on the city gate. Instead, he waited for a while until he saw the response signals from 3 different directions. Only then did Afai give the order. Afai was already a bit scared out of his wits from the response signals. He had his subordinates send out signals in 3 colors, blue and yellow. Yellow meant that this side's attack was very successful, blue meant that the attack was somewhat difficult, and red meant that this side's attack had met with a fatal blow. The response signals from the 3 sides, from Han Shuo's and Fok's sides, were all red. This meant that the attack from the 2 sides had met with a fatal blow right from the start. Because they'd used the strategy of luring the enemy in, the composed Dorcas didn't start with a fierce firepower. Therefore, the Flying Dragon Bandits who were observing from that side had sent out a blue signal. The 2 red and 1 blue signals didn't look good at all. Afai wanted to preserve his strength, so he ordered some of his subordinates to attack the city gate that Dick and Chester were guarding. Chester and the others had never faced such a situation before. When they saw Phi's bandits charging over, they immediately gave the order to fiercely bombard them. Because Han Shuo and the others were worried that they wouldn't be able to handle it, their firepower was actually the fiercest. When the two magic crystal cannons and war chariots spat out tongues of flame, and the ballistae and catapults revealed their terrifying destructive power, more than half of the several hundred bandits that Phi had sent out were instantly killed. The startled Phi immediately gave the order to observe. He was already a bit scared. After luring the enemy over, Dorcas's side suddenly erupted with firepower. The area that was extremely close to the city wall exploded with terrifying destructive power in an instant. Several hundred bandits who'd reached the city wall were instantly drowned in cannon fire. The bandit who'd originally sent out a blue signal shot out two red signals in a row when he saw the originally calm and collected cannons suddenly become so fierce. Phi was already a bit on edge. When he saw the originally blue signal turn into two red signals, he immediately gave the order to retreat another 100 meters, forbidding anyone from continuing to attack. When fast retreated, Phi didn't send out a single soldier. He only sat on his warhorse and stared at Dick and the others on the city wall in the distance. It was as if he was preparing to overwhelm the other side in terms of momentum. He was waiting for the other bandit groups to attack Brettel City and take advantage of the situation. When that time came, he would make his move on those bastards on the city wall. When the news of Phi's failure was spread by Phi's subordinates, the alarmed Phi understood that he definitely wouldn't be able to obtain any benefits this time. Without another word, Phi made a prompt decision to immediately give the order to retreat. The group of bandits that had surged forth left behind 200 corpses and swiftly retreated into the distance. Chester and Fabian, who'd experienced this kind of scene for the first time, looked at Phi hatefully galloping away. They thought to themselves complacently, "It looks like our side is indeed powerful. Could it be that I've scared them out of their wits just by looking at them from afar?" Chapter 335. Han Shuo was most worried about the city gate that Chester and Dick were in charge of. When he rushed over, he discovered that the soldiers on the city walls were all safe and sound. The traces of battle in front of the city walls weren't intense, and the 200 or so bandits' corpses indicated that the bandits hadn't suffered many losses. "Are you all right?" Han Shuo descended like a rainbow and heaved a sigh of relief when he saw the complacent Chester and the others. "My lord, we're fine. That cowardly bandit only charged once and then kept watching the city gate from afar. He suddenly retreated just now." Chester smiled easily and pointed in the direction that Phi had left in as he spoke to Han Shuo. Han Shuo nodded after taking a look from afar and said, "It's good that you're all right. Leave 300 of you to guard this city gate. The rest, go support Dorcas at the city gate." "All right, we'll set out immediately." Dick and Chester responded and began to instruct the soldiers who hadn't made a move much in high spirits, yelling for them to quickly descend the city walls and support the other two sides. Rumble, deafening explosions rang out from the other two city walls. Han Shuo flew directly towards the side that Falk was guarding. Dorcas was a military genius. He displayed extraordinary intelligence when he'd kidnapped the merchants last time, and he'd performed similarly well when he'd swept away the bandits afterwards. Han Shuo believed that there wouldn't be too much of a problem on his side. On the contrary, it was this night-born Falk. Although his strength was a bit higher, perhaps it was because of his knighthood that he'd been restricted by some dogma. His arrangements on the battlefield weren't flexible enough, and Han Shuo was worried that he'd suffer a loss. When Han Shuo arrived at the city walls that Falk was guarding, he saw the bandits' corpses strewn all over the ground. He then looked at the 100 or so soldiers on the city walls that had been pierced by arrows. He immediately understood that the battle here must have been very intense. Falk's side was facing the Tomahawk bandits. The towering leader of the Tomahawk bandits, Bynum, wasn't as adept at fighting as fast, nor was he as adept at scheming as Phi. This simple-minded man had been blinded by 1,000,000 gold coins and had thrown all of his subordinates into a violent assault. Falk was doing his utmost to resist the Tomahawk bandits' assault. The two sides had sunk into a cruel war of attrition. The barbarian Bynum, who had suffered heavy casualties, didn't seem to know how to retreat. He roared with all his might as he commanded his subordinates to attack the walls. More than 100 soldiers on Fox's side had died unknowingly, and 400 of them were either heavily injured or lightly injured. The remaining soldiers didn't have much strength left. If it wasn't for the citizens of Brettel City joining the defense against the bandits at the critical moment, Fox's side would have been in grave danger. By the time Han Shuo arrived, the battle had already reached its climax. More than a dozen tyrannical bandits had already rushed up the city walls, engaging in battle with the soldiers on top. The soldiers, who were almost out of strength, unleashed their last bit of strength to stab, hack, and slash. Some of the citizens, facing the threat of the bandits, actually joined the fray without fear of death. They raised their spears and continued to stab the bandits who had climbed up the walls. Han Shuo landed on top of the city walls like a bolt of lightning, setting off a whirlwind of death. He let out a soul-stirring howl as he charged into the middle of the dozen bandits by himself. His two hands were like sharp, indestructible weapons, piercing through a bandit's body with a single thrust. It didn't take long for all of the bandits to be killed on the spot with their chests and stomachs cut open. With the death of these bandits who'd madly attacked the soldiers, there was no longer any way to stop the skeletal staff-wielding archmage necromancer, Han Shuo. A terrifying undead army gradually filled the area below the city walls, accompanied by a long and drawn-out chant. The evil knights brandished their huge bone spears, and several bandits would be turned into a bloody mess by the sharp bone spears that were shrouded in death energy. Groups of gargoyles whistled past like crows, sending the bandits on their warhorses flying into the air. Before they could even fall to the ground, the gargoyles had already torn them into pieces. This time, the acid swamp covered the group of bandits, and the terrible screams never stopped. Groups of bandits were corroded by the acid swamp into new white skeletons. Han Shuo's appearance had completely reversed the situation. Every time the demonic Han Shuo waved his skeletal staff, there would be surging waves of magical elements. Hordes of undead would appear, or acid swamps with astonishing destructive power would appear. From time to time, a few corpse explosions would explode, causing the Tomahawk bandits to suffer more and more casualties. Seeing that Han Shuo's appearance had turned the battlefield upside down, the leader of the Tomahawk bandits, Bynum, roared in anger. He overestimated his own abilities and actually urged his warhorse to charge at Han Shuo. Before they'd even reached Han Shuo, his skeletal staff shook slightly and a circle of strong magical ripples spread out. Rows of javelin-like bone spears pierced through the air, so dense that it was like a sudden rainstorm. Without any luck, Bynum and the warhorse he was riding were all pierced by the bone spears. Everything that wasn't protected by armor was pierced through. 2 of the bone spears directly pierced through Bynum's eye sockets. He didn't even have time to let out a cry before he died. The leader is dead. Han Shuo's arrival caused a huge panic among the bandits. The terrified bandits suddenly screamed when they discovered Bynum's tragic death. It was like a reason and an excuse to escape. None of the surviving Tomahawk bandits dared to stay, and they fled the area without a care for anything else. One of the more daring and meticulous bandits pretended to lift Bynum's corpse, but secretly took off Bynum's space ring. Han Shuo, who'd always liked to profit from the dead, discovered the bandits' tracks with a glance. He laughed lightly and floated down from the top of the city wall like a ghost. He soundlessly approached the bandit who was madly sprinting in ecstasy and said, "Sometimes, the wealth of the dead can make it difficult to protect one's own life." The bandit who'd taken off Bynum's space ring thought that his comrade was greedy for his loot when he heard the sound coming from behind him. He turned around with an ominous glint in his eyes and swung his axe down. With a flick of Han Shuo's right index finger, the axe flew out with a clang. The bandit suddenly felt an unparalleled force surge into his arm, and he couldn't help but stagger backwards. He'd already turned around and clearly saw who the person behind him was. The bandit didn't dare to show off anymore and scrambled away. Unfortunately, The bandit had no chance of escaping in front of Han Shuo, who was flying over like a ghost. Han Shuo easily pierced through the bandit's body from behind. He took out Bynum's space ring and flew back to Fawkes' side with a smile on his face. Another extra income, Han Shuo said to the panting Fawkes with a smile. Since Han Shuo had appeared here, Fawkes understood that the crisis on his side had already been resolved. Fawkes understood that Han Shuo's strength was astonishing. He knew that the battle here would be over the moment Han Shuo appeared. Reality proved that Fawkes' judgment was indeed correct. The bandits didn't dare linger after Bynum's death, especially with the terrifying destructive power of the undead army. Therefore, all the bandits fled from the city wall like a tide after leaving behind over 1,000 corpses. The rumbling of the magic crystal cannons on the other side of the city gate also gradually faded away. Han Shuo understood that Dorcas's side should be coming to an end now that he couldn't hear the cannons anymore. This was the first time Brettel City had faced such a huge test, but they'd finally withstood it with everyone's combined efforts. After witnessing Han Shuo's terrifying strength, all of the citizens who'd participated in the battle looked at Han Shuo with reverence. When the last bandit disappeared into the distance, their reverence gradually turned into trust. Thunderous cheers suddenly spread throughout the entire city wall. Today, all the citizens who participated in the battle will receive a reward of 5 gold coins. Fawkes, you're in charge of distributing them. Han Shuo smiled as he looked at the citizens who'd survived the calamity and instructed Fawkes. As soon as these words left Han Shuo's mouth, the cheering citizens erupted into even more intense shouts of excitement. Each and every one of them looked at Han Shuo with even more fervent gazes. They couldn't help but feel that the city lord was so mighty at this moment. Don't worry, my lord. I will definitely not treat these citizens who've helped us unfairly. Fawkes respectfully agreed. He looked at the corpses of the bandits outside the city, thinking that the armor and weapons these bandits had left behind should be worth a lot of gold coins. In addition, the bandits would definitely have some gold coins in their pockets, right? The bandits really have left. You're in charge of cleaning up the battlefield. I'll go take a look at the situation on Dorcas's side. After Han Shuo gave his instructions, he turned into a streak of light that streaked across the sky, flying towards the city gate that Dorcas was guarding. The sounds of the cannons gradually died down. Han Shuo looked into the distance and saw the billowing smoke of gunpowder, as well as the figures of the bandits gradually fading into the distance. The ground was littered with corpses, and the ground was riddled with holes. The situation was just as tragic as the previous 2 battles. Dorcas, who was guarding this city gate, didn't disappoint Han Shuo. When he arrived at Dorcas's side, Han Shuo discovered that Dorcas was counting the number of dead and wounded soldiers. With a glance, Han Shuo discovered that there were dozens of corpses neatly arranged in one area. Dorcas led the remaining soldiers to stand in front of the dead soldiers, solemnly saluting them after counting their numbers. Han Shuo walked to Dorcas's side, not saying anything. The bodies of the young soldiers who had died in front of him all had quite a few crossbow bolts stuck in them. Some had been stabbed to death by flying short axes, while others didn't even have their limbs intact. They must have experienced a period of unbearable pain before they died. A heavy and oppressive atmosphere emanated from the solemn salute of Dorcas and the others. Han Shuo also performed the same military salute as Dorcas to show respect to the dead. After a while, Dorcas opened his mouth. There will always be casualties in war. This is something that no one can change. All I can do is reduce the number of casualties on my side, and do my best to make the enemy suffer as much as possible. Nodding his head, Han Shuo agreed. That's right. Sometimes, being cruel to the enemy is being kind to yourself. I think our soldiers' equipment needs to be improved. Sturdier armor and weapons will increase the chances of survival for our soldiers. My lord, how are the other 3 sides? Dorcas took a deep breath and finally shifted his gaze away from the dead soldiers. He looked at Han Shuo and asked, apart from Dick and the other 3 sides are about the same as yours. However, we've managed to hold them all. Han Shuo revealed a gratified smile as he answered Dorcas. Nodding his head, Dorcas let out a sigh of relief and said, "That's good." Tap, 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 tap. It was only at this time that Dick, Chester, and the others finally rushed over. When they discovered that Han Shuo was already standing there, they understood that the battle was probably over. Before they knew it, it was already dusk. A large patch of fiery clouds of sunset bloomed with the final radiance of the day. Under the illumination of the fiery clouds of sunset, the billowing smoke of battle seemed to be smeared with a layer of blood, adding a touch of poignant beauty to the hellish battlefield on earth. Flocks of crows flew over with strange cries. Smelling the scent of corpses, they pounced on the corpses of the bandits on the ground, tearing and devouring the delicious flesh to their heart's content as they let out disgusting cries. More and more crows gathered in the dusk of sunset, their mournful cries seeming to tell of the unbearable sight of the scene. "It's over. It's finally over," Han Shuo muttered to himself, casually giving a few instructions before returning to the city lord's mansion. For 3 days in a row, smoke billowed outside Bretel City. Some of the residents who lived close to the city gates could smell the pungent smell of burning corpses. A total of 15,000 bandits had attacked, but in the end, they'd left behind 8,000 corpses, as well as 400,000 gold coins worth of armor and weapons, as well as 200,000 gold coins scattered around. In addition, the leader of the Battle Axe Gang had 300,000 gold coins in his space ring. The 4 bandit groups that had come with greed for gold coins not only didn't obtain a single gold coin from Bretel City, but had instead delivered a lot of gold coins to Bretel City as Han Shuo had said. In this battle, more than 327 Bretel City soldiers had died, and 769 were gravely injured. The remaining survivors had more or less suffered some injuries. The magic crystal or of the 6 magic crystal cannons had been completely used up. The goblin explosives and tens of thousands of crossbow bolts that the merchants had transported over this time had all been used up. Not a single drop of kerosene was left, and the giant stones used for the catapults had long since been used up. The bandits that had rushed up during the siege had recklessly destroyed 2 war chariots, for ballistae, and a cumbersome catapult. Two days ago, when Han Shuo had found Jack, he'd still been hiding in his room, vomiting incessantly. After watching the entire battle from start to finish, Jack's appetite for meat had greatly diminished, and he'd often vomited for a few days in a row. At that time, Han Shuo had thought that Jack would leave after experiencing this tragic battle. He hadn't thought that this fellow would actually have such astonishing willpower, insisting on staying here. From Fabian, Han Shuo knew that Jack was very talented in gold coin management and financial affairs. Under the guidance of several experienced gentlemen at the Buzzed Merchant Guild, Jack had displayed financial management skills that even moved Phoebe. Aside from the fact that Jack and Han Shuo were light majors, Phoebe had taken such good care of Jack because of Jack's and Han Shuo's light majors, but also because of Jack's performance in this area. After learning of this situation, Han Shuo didn't continue to persuade Jack when he saw that Jack insisted on staying in Bretel City. Instead, he directly gave Jack the position of financial officer in front of Falk, Dorcas, and the others, along with the gold coins he'd obtained from Troda last time, including Helentina's 400,000 gold coins, as well as all the gold coins he'd obtained this time, were all handed over to Jack, allowing him to manage this enormous amount of wealth. If it had been anyone else, Han Shuo wouldn't have dared to hand over such a large amount of gold coins. Only Jack, who'd grown up with him at the Babylon Academy of Magic and Force, was someone that Han Shuo could truly be at ease with. Han Shuo was the true master of Bretel City. Han Shuo didn't need anyone's approval to make any of the personnel transfers in the surrounding areas. Falk, Dorcas, and the others didn't have any right to interfere or question him. With such a large amount of wealth in his hands, Jack had sunk into great excitement and panic for a very long time. It wasn't until Han Shuo comforted him for a long time that he gradually adapted to the role of financial officer. Fabian's words to Han Shuo were indeed correct. With such a large amount of wealth in Jack's hands, he'd gone from his initial panic to adapting to the role. He actually started to methodically and clearly divide the uses of the gold coins, recording each transaction in detail. This caused Han Shuo to have a whole new level of respect for Jack. Falk and the others hadn't trusted Jack in the beginning, but when they received their pay from Jack and heard him clearly list the value of each piece of armor and weapon, they were already a bit surprised. When Jack took the initiative to contact a few merchants and helped Falk, Dorcas, and the others purchase some war equipment that were in short supply at a much lower price than Falk and Dorcas had expected, the two gradually relaxed.